Archie Battersby's family are given until 9 a.m. to launch a new legal bid. All life support will be turned off.
Good morning to you. It's 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 4th of August. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Stephen.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says the legal battle to maintain her son's life support is at an end after the European Court said it would not interfere with the UK court's ruling.
Life support is now expected to be withdrawn at 11 o'clock today unless an application requesting Archie be moved to a hospice is submitted by 9 a.m.
In other news, former Health Secretary Javid has endorsed Liz Truss for the Conservative leadership in another blow to Rishi Sunak. The two candidates will now go head-to-head in a leadership debate tonight.
The Bank of England delivers its latest interest rate decision at midday today as the UK faces possible recession. Rates expected to go up again, raising costs for millions of borrowers.
Remember, we love to hear from you throughout the programme. Get in touch. You can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. So our top story this morning, the mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says their legal battle is at an end.
Well, the 12-year-old's life support will be turned off this morning unless the family can submit an application to the High Court to have him moved to a hospice.
Well, let's remind you of Archie's story so far. On the 7th of April, Archie was found unresponsive at his home and was taken to Southend Hospital.
On June 13th, the High Court in London concluded that Archie is brainstem dead. That's based on MRI results, and they decide that life support treatment can end.
Well, on the 20th of June, Archie's parents asked the Court of Appeal to reconsider the case. It rules that a new hearing should take place, but judges decide that life support can end.
On the 28th of July, the Supreme Court says it will not intervene in the case, supporting the Court of Appeal ruling.
A day later, on the 29th of July, the family make an application to a UN committee to consider the case, leading to the government calling for a review 2 days later.
Well, then yesterday, on the 3rd of August, Archie's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, who refused the application to intervene.
Well, let's go and get the latest now from our reporter Ellie Costello, who joins us this morning from the Royal London Hospital. And Ellie, as we could just hearing from that timeline, the parents in this case, many will understand, are trying to do everything they can to prolong the life of Archie and have the sort of ending to all of this that they would like. But as it appears, the legal battle having now come to an end.
Yes, it does seem as though we are reaching the final chapters of what is this really tragic tale. But of course, for the Battersby family, this is not a story. This is about their 12-year-old little boy, and they are running out of options in this fight. Last night, the European Court of Human Rights, they refused an application for Archie Battersby's parents to postpone the life support treatment being ended. They said they couldn't intervene with UK court rulings. Now, that won't come as a surprise to legal experts who were saying yesterday that legal precedent was not in their favour. You may remember the very similar tragic case of Charlie Gard in 2017. The ECHR then said they couldn't intervene in UK court decisions, and that was expected to be the decision yesterday. But the Battersby family certainly felt as though they had to go down that route. They had to feel as though they had done everything in their power. But it does mean that all legal options have now been exhausted. The Battersby family have lost in all of the UK courts. That's twice in the High Court, once in the Appeal Court, and finally in the Supreme Court. That is the highest court in the land. All judges have said the same thing. They say that it is not in Archie Battersby's best interest for his life support treatment to continue. They say that he is brainstem dead and he has no prospect of any meaningful recovery. So it does mean that Archie Battersby's family now have until 9 o'clock this morning to launch a separate legal bid, and this is about permission to move Archie from the Royal London Hospital behind us to a local hospice to spend his last few hours with his family.
This has got to be actually very difficult for people in that hospital as well, Ellie. I mean, because, as far as they're concerned, they're doing what is in the best interests of the patient here, of best interests of Archie, but with it amidst a huge amount of tension.
Yes, there is huge amounts of tension in this hospital behind us. Holly Dance was talking about that with reporters yesterday. They had been at loggerheads really since day 2 of Archie's admission to this hospital. They've had differing opinions from the beginning on how best to treat him. And for the Battersby family, it does very much feel like a David and Goliath battle as to how best to treat Archie. Holly Dance said she felt as though it was her and Archie up against the NHS Trust and the legal system. Well, Bart's Health NHS Trust, which is in charge of the hospital behind us, they say in a statement that our deepest sympathies remain with Archie's family and we aim to provide the best support possible at this difficult time. Well, Holly Dance, who is Archie's mother, was speaking yesterday to the press, and she said she gets on well with the nurses in the room. She understands that they are just doing their job, but she did say that it's very tense inside the hospital with the doctors and the specialists there. She says openly she feels as though the hospital has failed Archie. She very much feels as though Archie could still wake up and that Archie is still very much alive. The hospitals say that he is brain dead. And there's now that one final sticking point, that one final big issue of tension, and that is the issue of where Archie should die. Holly Dance passionately believes that Archie should be taken to a local hospice. She wants him outside in a garden. She described the sound of birds and squirrels and being in fresh air. She wants her son to pass in really peaceful setting. The hospitals say that moving Archie at this late stage now will only cause him to deteriorate more, and it's not in his best interests to move him to a hospice. Yesterday, Holly Dance was still clutching at hope. She mentioned to reporters that Japan and Italy have both offered treatment to Archie. She would have liked to have taken him aboard for treatment, but if the hospital won't allow Archie to move to a hospice, it's very, very unlikely they'd allow him to travel overseas. So we do have up until 9 o'clock this morning for the family to challenge Bart's Health NHS Trust. They're going to ask for Archie to be moved to a hospice, and if we know the Battersby family so far, we know that they will fight this to the bitter end.
Well, it sounds as though there could be an update whilst we are on air. Ellie, I know you'll bring that to us just as soon as you hear anything, but for now, thank you.
Now, Rishi Sunak has suffered another setback in his campaign to become Britain's next Prime Minister after Sajid Javid, his old boss, of course, decided to back Liz Truss.
Well, both leadership hopefuls answered questions last night from Tory members at a hustings contest in Cardiff when the former Health Secretary attacked Rishi Sunak's economic plan, saying they would lead Britain sleepwalking into a high-tax, low-growth economy.
Well, let's talk to Senior Political Campaign Director Peter Barnes, who joins us now. Morning to you, Peter. I mean, it seems like there's no way back for Mr Sunak in all of this now.
Yeah, pretty much. He needs Liz to make one big mistake now. He's so far behind in the polling. There was that YouGov poll that put a 34 points ahead. I mean, we always said that he would struggle to connect with the membership, but I thought he would do a lot better than he's actually achieved right now. He did perform quite well at the hustings. He's very good in the media. But he's just not connecting with people. And
why?
Honestly, I think there's still a little bit of bitterness about how he resigned with the Boris situation. I think that has played a big factor, but also he's just seen as a kind of bit of an establishment figure and he's just not connecting.
Is it not just all about the big mo, as it's called, the momentum that Liz Truss has now got? Every other day, a big beast now coming out and endorsing her because they presumably can smell cabinet opportunities for them. And the very fact that Sajid Javid, as you say, Rishi Sunak's former boss in the Treasury, has now turned on an old ally and back Liz is really just as bad as it can get, really.
Pretty much, yeah. You're right about the momentum. Like, Liz is now riding high. Like, for what I expect from her campaign now is it to go just very quiet, for it to just ride this out. Because, like I said, if she makes a mistake now, it lets Rishi back in the game. So I'm not really expecting any major big policy announcements anymore. I'm expecting just for her to kind of take this over, wait till the election day, and then pretty much walked straight into number 10.
It's interesting, isn't it? Rishi Sunak did a U-turn over a tax issue, which landed him in hot water. Liz Truss did a U-turn over regional pay. She seems to have got away with it.
That is interesting. I did, when that story happened, I thought, oh, this is the one. This is the mistake that she's made. But she managed to clean it up very quickly. I have to admit, she wasn't really pressed that hard on it in the hustings last night, which did surprise me. Rishi did try to go after it. But again, any attack that he seems to try to put on Liz, she just seems to bat away with relative ease. She's very well prepared for these hustings. Like, she's going in confident, she looks strong. And I have to admit, when those first couple of debates, I thought she was quite weak. But actually, as with this campaign's gone forward, she's got better and better.
OK, well, look, stay where you are, Peter. We'll come back to you in a moment. But I want to bring in a GB News viewer and listener, Ertan Hura. He joins us from home. Where's that, Ertan? Told he's coming.
He's there somewhere. There you are, Ertan. Good to see you. Where is home for you?
It's just up the road in Cheshunt.
Oh, Cheshunt. Very nice. Very, very nice.
Now, you are one of the all-important Conservative Party members who will decide who our future Prime Minister is going to be. Who are you backing?
Yeah. I'm leaning towards Liz at the moment, but my ballot paper is apparently on its way. I will be given the option, I understand, of either voting by paper or digitally online. So having that in mind, I'm going to wait right to the end, just in case, as your commentator said earlier, one or the other could make a mistake, or they could come up with something that grabs my attention and grabs my vote.
Which is interesting. So you're not wedded to anyone particularly at the moment, but as you say, leaning more towards Liz Truss. So what is it about her, and what is it not about Rishi Sunak?
I do like the fact she's more positive about going forward. She's looking to grow the economy through tax cuts, whereas Rishi is saying he's almost defeatist, saying we can't cut taxes because we are going to go into a recession and we can't afford to do it. So I do like her optimism.
You don't think that he might have a bit more of a sort of inside track on how exactly that works, given that he's been in the Treasury and in the top job of Chancellor for a while? I mean, I think it's one of the criticisms that he was levelling at Liz Truss anyway was that this was fantasy politics, fantasy economics, and that actually he knew the realities.
Well, we've got the Bank of England saying that interest rates might rise already again today. So that's with the current proposed tax increases. So I don't see a link between cutting taxes and increasing interest rates and inflation. And what Liz is saying is that she's not going to increase corporation tax. So she's not going to decrease it. She's just not going to increase it to 25%. And she wants to reverse the national insurance increases, which are hitting business people and employees.
And I'm just reading in your brief here that you are a chartered accountant, so you know your numbers, and this is your bread and butter then, and you see how things are affecting businesses.
Yeah, and they are hurting. They're all complaining about their fuel costs, so their gas and electricity is going up, but also the costs of running their businesses are increasing. And if they're having to pay increased national insurance, that is another blow particularly to small businesses.
Do you get the sense that Liz Truss is more across the reality then of this than Rishi Sunak? I mean, it's the idea when we talk to our viewers and listeners all the time, and they say we need something to happen now. And the one thing Rishi Sunak says is, well, there's a potential of doing something in October. There's a potential of doing something in 2026. I mean, it all seems a very long way off.
It is too far, and I think a lot of businesses and a lot of people want to see something now, and not in 4 years or what may happen in 4 years or 5 years' time. For me personally, interest rate increases and tax rises are a lazy policy. They need to look at the underlying problems in the economy. We do need to start having an industrialisation policy, tax simplification policy. We need to get this country up and running again.
OK, Ertan, Hura, really good to get your thoughts this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to get a final thought from you, Peter Barnes, and just in the context, widening this out really into sort of the political landscape at the moment. And you only have to look at the front pages today to see how many different stories are gracing them, whether that be Taiwan or the situation we have at home with water shortages in some areas and hosepipe bans. One of the issues that sort of appears to be coming to the fore is the fact that this leadership race is rumbling on with a clear front-runner, and yet there are lots of other crises that are not necessarily getting the attention that perhaps they should.
Well, this is one of the issues I had with them having this race to go on as long as it's already gone on now. There is, like you said, there's so much happening right now, and the Tory party just seem to be exercising in a bit of a navel-gazing moment, and I do think that, like you said, there's a clear front runner now. Is it not worth Rishi maybe bowing out and then we can move on and actually start to tackle some of these
That wouldn't
issues?
satisfy the party, though, would it? Because what people have said from the very beginning of this is that they don't want a coronation.
Well, I think we're heading there anyway. With the list riding so high, I think we've moved past an actual election now. I think it is basically Liz's to lose, and when that happens, I think we are at a coronation territory, which is where we were with Boris in 2019.
OK. Peter, good to talk to you. Thanks very much. It is 16 minutes past 6. Let's bring you up to date with some of the headlines today then. And Archie Battersby's family say they intend to file an application to the High Court to transfer him to a hospice. That's after they lost a final attempt to delay the withdrawal of life support. Last month, the High Court ruled that the 12-year-old, who's been in a coma since April, must remain in hospital while his treatment is stopped. But his parents say they want to choose where their son has his last moments. They say Bart's NHS Health Trust will end Archie's treatment by 11 today unless an application is submitted to the court by 9 o'clock.
Almost two-thirds of people are worried about the prospect of rising interest rates as the cost of living crisis continues. Figures from a latest Ipsos poll show 64% say they're fairly or very concerned, whilst 80% of those aged between 18 and 34 share the same concern. This as the Bank of England is expected to announce its largest interest rate rise in almost 30 years at midday today.
Scientists say climate change and population growth is putting the UK's water supply under too much strain. Water companies and researchers at Portsmouth University are blaming record-breaking heat waves and more intense rainfall. This comes as South East Water imposes a hose and sprinkler ban for millions of people from August the 12th. South East Water, who's losing currently 98 million litres, I think it is, of water a day through leaks.
Well, I think this is going to become the hot topic of the summer, if you pardon the pun, and that is going to be the crises that we're facing in terms of these water companies. And I think it's the Telegraph that's got this story about a water plant that actually has been secretly mothballed, that was only opened in 2010 at the cost of 250 million by Prince Philip, and it's just been quietly closed, and it could have helped with a lot of the problems. But a lot of us being made to feel guilty for using our hose pipes.
Now, what is interesting...
You're a big gardener.
I am a big gardener, and I'm not falling under South East Water because I live much further up the country, so that's good for me. And I know a lot of... See, when it comes to this hosepipe ban, at the moment, it's only a small part of the country. So it's not going to affect most of us. However, if it did, would you grass up a granny, as the Daily Star says today?
Quite apart from the picture, which I think is hilarious. You've got your classic granny with the rollers on.
It's not about classic
She's got
granny.
No, I know. That's what I mean.
She looks
the
livid.
Stereotypical, but I mean, nothing like my children's grannies.
No, but so would you... they're setting up these snoop lines.
I hate it. I hate
so that
snooping.
you can snoop on your neighbour.
Don't do it.
So would you?
No, would you?
No, I don't think so.
Ugh. No.
I don't think so.
I do think we need to all be conscious about water, trying not to waste water if there's a problem in your area. And obviously, I thought it was interesting, everyone was being told, let your lawn turn yellow and horrible and dirty. But then the Lawn Association came out and said, actually, we're almost a bit beyond repair now. If you don't water your lawn, it may never recover and everyone's going to have to be returfing next year. So that mixed messaging...
Did they really? That's because grass is very resilient.
Yeah, but they're saying it's so bad this year, it might never recover. So how are you handling these... hosepipe bans if it's in your area. Let us know.
Would you be a snitch? Wherever you live in the country, would you be a snitch? gbviews@gbnews.uk.
OK, stay with us. After the break, we're talking about interest rates. They're set to rise later today, and we'll be finding out what that impact will have on mortgages. First, though, your forecast.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south. Dry today, and in fact the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news though if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast. Generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week. But again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
With the time coming up to 25 minutes past 6. Still to come on this morning's programme, we'll be hearing from Britain's forgotten war widows who've been stripped of their pensions because they remarried. We'll be finding out at 6:45 why they're now calling on Liz Truss to have them reinstated.
At 7:20, another dramatic day at the Commonwealth Games. We'll tell you why it was an extra special occasion for runner Eilish McColgan. who emulated her mum Liz McColgan's performance 36 years ago.
And don't forget, we love to hear from you. Send those emails in, send those tweets in, gbnews@gbnews.uk or at gbnews on Twitter.
It's a cup of tea morning today.
It is, yeah. Struggle town.
Oh, honestly. What is it about the temperatures at the moment? Because
so hot.
But it's the humidity that's doing me. And sometimes it's about blowing a gale half the time, and then as soon as it stops, it's like...
Yeah, I hate being cold, but I had a fan on right next to my face all night. It's that hot.
That'll be costing you.
Well, it was only a tiny, tiny wee one.
That's what I think. I've got fans in the bedroom, and you do think, this is going to cost.
Yeah.
What do you do? I don't know. It's a nightmare, isn't it?
It is a nightmare. Sleep is a nightmare.
And if you're worried about the money, which you will be, I have no doubt, then it's not good news. Big day if you've got a mortgage or you're thinking of getting one, because the Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates by about 0.5% today, and that would be the biggest interest rate rise in the UK for 27 years.
We hear so many of these headlines, don't we,
all the time.
moment?
It's relentless.
It's just really worrying, especially for people who are trying to buy a house, get a new mortgage, or whether they're switching mortgages. Absolute nightmare. This comes after the independent living standards think tank, the Resolution Foundation, said that it thinks inflation will hit 15% at the start of next year, which will be pushed up by soaring energy bills. Paul Hawkins has been looking into it all.
Another day, another rise in the cost of living and potentially your mortgage repayments.
And that's because later today, the Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates, possibly by a whopping 0.5%. Now, that would be the biggest increase since 1995. It would mean just over 800,000 people on tracker mortgages would see their repayments go up immediately. And just over 1 million people on standard rate variable mortgages would see their repayments potentially go up later on.
In fact, a 0.5% increase in interest rates could add around £74 a month to a typical variable rate mortgage, or £888 a year based on a 250 grand loan with a 25-year term.
I'm very, very worried about taking out a variable rate mortgage. I know someone who did that 2 years ago and it's already gone up 3 times in that period.
Serena is 24, a first-time buyer looking to get a mortgage and a flat in London.
So it is very stressful to kind of think about the interest rate rise and what that might mean for me, who has to make a decision about whether to kind of fix a mortgage straight off the bat now or kind of take my chances and wait it out.
Has the interest rate rise and just the general increase in the cost of living made you think twice about buying your own place?
After 3 years of living at home, I've saved the money, but now it's just a case of I have the money saved, but the environment I'll be buying in is just so up and down. It's making me think, do I wait a year? But who's to say the situation will be any better in a year?
So why is the Bank of England increasing interest rates? The reason is inflation. In other words, prices, which, as we know, are sky high and continuing to rise.
The bank's been very clear. They want to make sure that we don't get into what's called a wage price spiral. And that's when inflation rises, people go to their employers and they say, look, inflation's higher, I'd like a pay rise. They want people to think that inflation is under control or will come under control so that they don't go and ask for pay rises, which feeds already high inflation.
But is raising interest rates an old school method for tackling modern inflation? Some economists argue that 1980s high inflation was different to what we're experiencing now. Back then it was driven by demand. We kept spending, so prices kept rising. The inflation now is caused by a lack of supply when it comes to energy, fuel, food and labour. Plus, the workforce today is very different to what it was back then.
Right now, unionization's at about 20%. Public sector employs only about 17% of people. So that risk of a wage price spiral is a lot less likely than it was in 1980.
So, with energy bills and the cost of fuel sky high, what's the advice from the money experts?
So look at everything that you're doing. Look at where you're shopping, how you're shopping. Look at waste. Look at how you're using your home, your energy, how you're getting to work. And every little thing that you do to save money will help.
For millions of us, mostly middle and working class, the cost of living is becoming the cost of surviving.
And that's why many people think the government is going to have to help out again. The question is, who does it help? How much help does it offer? For how long? And who pays for that help? Paul Hawkins, GB News.
It's depressing. isn't
Yeah.
it? It is depressing. You can understand the logistics behind it. So if they do that, then it discourages people from borrowing more, and that has a positive impact on inflation. That's how the sums work out. But in the meantime, everyone who's currently suffering with cost of living crisis is seeing just yet more prices go up.
And in the meantime, anyone who's been trying to renegotiate a mortgage, speaking from experience, impossible to get an appointment with the lenders because everybody's trying to do it before midday today. Luckily, our lender said we've got an appointment next week, but they'd honour the old interest rates just because of this backlog. But
That's
everybody's trying to deal with it all. So look, if you've been affected by that story, if you're worried about interest rates going up at midday today, you're worried about paying your mortgage, maybe you've got a tracker or a variable rate, let us know your experiences. Get in touch the usual ways.
I'll tell you what irritates me, actually, in all of this. There's a monetary policy committee make this decision, and it's announced at midday. And you know, we've done it for years, you and I. Gets to midday, breaking news, there it all is. How come we know it's going up 0.5%?
Already?
In advance. Who's leaked that out?
That's so true.
Someone's told us.
Well, yeah, he's been hinting heavily, hasn't he, Andrew Bailey? But as you say, it is a committee. It's not just his decision, but I'd be surprised if they went against him. We'll find out at midday.
Don't go anywhere, though. Coming up, we're going to take you through the papers this morning with David Wooding and Baroness Claire Fox.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
6:33. Oh, excuse me.
You okay, going to sneeze?
I've got a frog in my throat. There you go. Let's bring you up to date with the headlines this morning. And Archie Battersby's family say they intend to file an application to the High Court to transfer him to a hospice. That's after they lost the final attempt to delay the withdrawal of life support. They say Bart's NHS Health Trust will end Archie's treatment at 11 o'clock this morning unless an application is submitted to the court by 9 o'clock.
Javid has become the latest heavyweight to throw his support behind Liz Truss to become the Conservative Party leader. At the Cardiff hustings event last night, the Foreign Secretary reiterated her promise to cut tax and to grow the economy. Truss said she'd try to change the mandate of the Bank of England, arguing that increasing taxes could never lead to growth.
Rishi Sunak remains 34% behind his competitor. This is a new poll of Tory members. It's a huge gap. In the hustings event, he promised to give his heart and soul to the party. The former Chancellor set out a number of key policies, including what he described as bold and radical reforms to make the NHS cost-effective.
That's real mixed bag in terms of what's making the front page of the papers today, which makes a change, actually. We're going to go through those papers for you this morning with the political editor of The Sun on Sunday, David Wooding, and the director of the Academy of Ideas, Baroness Claire Fox. A very warm welcome to both of you. David, you're looking very sun-kissed, back from your holidays.
Yes.
Go anywhere nice?
Yes, we went to the island of Paxos in Greece, which was glorious, yeah.
Beautiful.
We escaped the heat wave. It was a pleasant 30 over there, and you were all baking in the 40s here.
Oh.
And then when it all went a bit dull here, it carried on sailing along at 30.
Yeah, suits you. Looking very well on it too. David, let's start with you, shall we? Lots of talk about surging inflation and talk now of this number, which is just, to a lot of people in their lifetimes, not been seen before. 15%. Fearing soars gas bills will push inflation to 15%.
Yeah, back from holiday to the grim reality of the cost of living here. And there's going to be a triple whammy this week of mortgage rates, interest rates, of course, and then, of course, you're going to have the gas bills going up as well. The Bank of England are going to expected to put up a 0.5 percentage point rise. It will be the biggest rise steepest rise since 1995, which will take it to 1.75%, which will add something like it says in the Express here, £196 a month on the typical medium mortgage. On top of that, there's likely to be an announcement later today on raising the cap on energy bills, which will add to energy bills going up to about £1,400 extra, an extra £250 in January. Overall, this is going to add something like £2,500 to the average family outgoings.
It's not sustainable, this, is it? I mean, it can't be.
I think when you read these stories, it's now got to a point where I just go, oh God, and I think that it's not even real for people. I mean, you can feel it's real when you go shopping and it costs more. Bills already coming in that are kind of eye-watering. But I think it's very difficult to get your head around the fact that this is actually happening, that really some of the scenes that we've seen over the years from different countries is people going out on the streets and saying we can't afford to pay our bills, we can't afford to eat, feel very distant. Now it feels very close. And so I don't think it's really hit people what it will mean, but there's a kind of atmosphere of anxiety. One of the things that I was thinking when I've been trying to follow this leadership campaign is there's like these rows about what tax you cut, whether you cut taxes, go for growth, all the rest of it. That feels very divorced from these very real issues. And there is no sense of urgency. It's almost like an abstract discussion going on over there about policy. But there's no sense of... Actually, one of the things that we face is the energy crisis. Without going into the politics of it. But it's like, well, can't you just, start fracking now? Do something dramatic, go out and start drilling for oil. It's like a sense of... This is... there's so many crises that we... And everybody's having a crisis over something, it's... Pandemic crisis, energy, all the rest of it. But this does feel to me as though a sense of urgency might be required. But in
terms of all this is what I don't get, and maybe you understand this more than I do, that companies like Centrica are making, because this is all down to supply and demand, it's the market economy. Centrica's making a fortune out of this now. Is there not a CSR, sort of corporate and social responsibility thing, where they could turn around and say, actually, despite what the market is demanding, we will reduce prices?
Well, they could do that. I mean, no, but there is also, in the longer term, I think the problem is that these are quite immediate, short-term solutions, and there is a long economy that they have to think about, right? So they might be having a boost now. In the future, they might not have a boost. What would you say that when they're not doing so well, they go back to the consumer and say, can we have some money back, please? I mean,
Also, the danger that these companies would take their bases overseas if they felt that they were being penalised here in the UK. It's such a difficult balance.
I mean, of course, when you see BP's profits yesterday, the immediate instinct, as it were, on the couch, when you're watching it at home, is to go, give us some money. You know what I mean? That's not right. It feels morally reprehensible that they get big profits and people are suffering. All I'm saying is that's not necessarily a serious political solution. And I'm just talking about the fact that I want to see some sense that there's a longer-term thought going into how you can resolve this But there is obviously going to be a problem for the government in terms of helping people survive this. I mean, I do think that there's going to be... it's not just suffering, I think there'll be a fight. And I think some of the strike action that we've seen so far reflects that. People can have a moan and say, we don't like the RMT and some of them get too much money and I don't like strikes and all that. This is the way that people express the fact that they feel as though it's not right that ordinary working people are having a massive attack on their living standards through no fault of their own.
But it's interesting, David, isn't it? Because, I mean, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Claire, but if we need to take a longer-term view, that's sort of what Rishi Sunak claims to be offering to all of this. But what is proving to be popular is Liz Truss saying, I'm going to do something now.
Well, it's jam tomorrow from Rishi and Liz Truss saying that she can do it now. But, of course, his argument is, well, you might be doing the wrong thing by doing it now. So it's a big economic argument about how you tackle it. What's interesting?
Gamble worth taking?
Well, it is for her because she can win the leadership as a result of that.
All of the big voices were coming out very much in support of Rishi Sunak's approach on this in the beginning, and they seem to have gone quiet. I'm talking about the IMF, the think tanks as well. They're all saying that it's not responsible to cut taxes now. It's not conservative to cut taxes now. Margaret Thatcher wouldn't be cutting taxes now, and yet that voice has been completely drowned out in all of this.
Yes, lots of Conservative MPs want to cut taxes now because they're under pressure from their own constituencies, the people who will be voting in this election, to cut taxes.
But all I'm saying...
This is doing so well.
Sorry.
Yes.
No, but I think the problem is it's just reduced to the tax question.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And my longer-term thing is... I don't mean... Because I didn't really mean the Rishi...
No, I know, but I'm just...
what I'm saying is... You might not be able to solve the problem of your energy bill straight away by saying drill for oil now, but the idea that you're not doing the things which are going to, for example, tackle the energy crisis, and when you say go for growth, and then Liz Truss says there'll be a few free ports, you think, just start, building some infrastructure that works. Start on those projects now.
On, as they say.
Crack on. I just feel as though there's a posturing here without a sense of economic dynamism being properly discussed and dealt with and work being done on it. And when you talk about mortgages going up, that's part of the terrible problem that we're going to have now. As that's going to be a real issue. But we're still not building houses, right? And there's a real crisis of house building. And I just think there's a lot of these things that they could do that would then create jobs, create a sense of dynamism in a local area, get things going. Where's that excitement and where's that energy?
Yeah, and look, apart from the economic crises, other problems that are very much demanding our attention, David, on the front of the Times this morning, it has to be said on the front of a few of the papers, the Star and the Metro as well, is this hosepipe ban in a series of places. Millions of people now being told they can't water their gardens, wash their cars, whatever it might be, fill their swimming pools.
Yes.
I've heard this before. Fill your swimming pools.
There are quite a few
Who's
people
got a swimming pool?
Whenever I look on Google Maps, I'm amazed how many people do. Anyway, I would love to know the figures. But anyway, don't fill your swimming pool.
Paddling pool. Not fill your paddling pool, perhaps, but a swimming pool.
Well, that picture on the front of the Times actually shows it as well because it's Greenwich Park and it looks England's brown and pleasant land. And... all the lawns are suffering as a result, but we can't hosepipe them if you live in the south now because South East Water have become the second water company after Southern to impose a drought, a water hosepipe and sprinkler
Swimming pool ban.
Swimming pools. Thames, South West and Wales are next to follow, it seems. So, this always happens, doesn't it, in the UK? We have a bit of nice weather and within a few weeks...
What about this grassing up your granny theory?
Oh, it's awful. I've got that one. Grasshopper neighbour is on the front page of the Metro and Grasshopper granny on the front page of the Daily Star.
Don't you?
People will.
But that's what I'm saying is, what an unpleasant outcome of this. But they're saying, can you tell on your neighbour? I just think we had enough snitching during the lockdown period. We want to get rid of that atmosphere.
The way to stop your neighbour snitching on you is to invite them to come in and have a dip in your swimming pool.
That's the way.
That's the way.
Right.
That's the way.
Can I
they won't snitch on you.
There's actually an interesting sort of side to this, which is Meg Hillier, who's the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, probing the water companies, revealed that 2.4 billion litres of water is leaking every day because of underfunded infrastructure. So my point about, you know, doing a bit of real proper economic growth to sort the infrastructure out. So the onus is put onto individual behaviour. Don't get the hosepipe out. When actually the genuine problem, or we have a massive row about climate change. Is it climate change? By the way, every time I say the hosepipe ban, I'm sitting in, you know, Chester and it's raining. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I'm trying to go outside to read the book in the sun and it's raining all the time. Anyway, that's on one side. It's treated as though it's a crisis of weather or individuals' irresponsibility. Actually, we discover that there isn't a crisis in this country if you solve the infrastructure question. That's what needs investment so that all of those burst and cracked pipes in the water industry stop leaking.
We've been writing about this for years. I mean, I was reading about that when I was at school. And again, the traffic problems we have, roadworks all over the place. Every time your local town centre is closed, it's invariably because of some problems with the water mains bursting because they haven't been fixed.
Right,
yeah. I mean, it's crackers, isn't it? Meanwhile, looking at something just to keep us smiling, or perhaps not, if we haven't got enough problems in the world, The Guardian, Claire, looking at Taiwan. I mean, this has been bubbling under the surface for so many decades now, and now it seems China thinks this is the time to really up the ante on Taiwan.
To be fair...
Go on.
There was no particular reason for Nancy Pelosi to fly over to Taiwan to make I mean, in diplomatic terms, this might well be a provocative act. That's the point that I'm making. Now, I completely support Taiwan and think that China's threatening language towards Taiwan is unacceptable. We get all that, right? And there's all sorts of concerns about China that we can all express. But in a world of fragile geopolitical considerations, I think that possibly trying to kind of do the war saber-rattling talk in relation to China is not wise. That is my view, right? And so, consequently, this is an act of, some might say, you know, quite blatant attempt at saying, well, I don't care what happens. And so now there's manoeuvres around Taiwan from China. This is unacceptable, but it's not as though it's unprovoked. You could say, well, why shouldn't she go? But I do think that even Biden said, well, maybe not at this time.
Well,
you know, you can see...
He couldn't endorse it, could he?
He couldn't... No, but he couldn't... But she's his deputy. She's not anybody. Of course, Tom Tugendhat said, I'll go from the UK. Think, oh, God. So what I'm trying to say is that I do think it's very important, that diplomatic and strategic grown-up behaviour is the way that we, as different countries...
Ukraine, did it?
No, but as different countries... No, but there was an invasion there. I understand. But it's also the case that if you look at the post-Cold War period in relation to Russia, that wasn't always handled well. I'm simply suggesting that one needs to be grown up about these things. And just going around saying, we're on your side and so on, can cause problems. And when it says this headline, Taiwan braces for China blockade, reading between the lines, and I just don't know, people in Taiwan are obviously delighted to get American support, but whether they would want it this way, it could cause problems for them.
Yeah, OK. Look, good to talk to you both. Claire Fox, David Wooding. We'll see you both a little bit later on. Thank you.
Now, hundreds of British war widows are calling on whoever becomes the next Prime Minister to right a historic wrong and reinstate their war widow pensions.
Now, until 2015, those whose partners died in active service were stripped of their pensions if they remarried.
Although the law was changed 7 years ago, around 300 who'd married before were not included in the new scheme. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has spoken exclusively to some of the widows who say they've been forgotten by a government that simply doesn't care.
He lived for flying. You marry somebody in the Air Force, you marry the military, and everything that comes with it.
Jude Howcroft's husband Bill was killed in a flying accident behind the controls of his RAF Tornado in 1998. In the months before his death, Jude recalls one particular conversation where her husband insisted if the worst ever happened, she had to try her best to move on with her life.
Bill actually sat me down and said, right, we need to have a conversation. Things do happen, you've seen it. And I want you to promise me that if you fall in love again, you don't hold back and you live your life for me and the kids.
7 years after Bill's death, Jude finally found love again and remarried. Official government policy meant she automatically lost her £7,000 annual war widows compensation payment.
I have never stopped loving Bill. Ever. But the fact that I had to give up my pension, it was almost being judged that how dare I find love again. I clearly couldn't have loved my first husband. And it just makes me so angry.
In 2015, the government changed its policy, ensuring any war widow who remarried still received their war widow's pension. But hundreds who'd remarried before that date were not included. They are, they say, the forgotten widows.
What's wrong? It's immoral. It's discrimination. And the compensation, which is called the War Widow's Pension, is the only tangible link these individuals have to their late husband.
40 years after the death of her husband Ian aboard HMS Argonaut in the Falklands, and although Margaret Allen remarried, she is still profoundly affected by his loss. She met the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, in 2018, who promised to right a wrong, to ensure that war widows' pensions were restored. Margaret's now calling on the woman who may well be our next Prime Minister to make good on that promise.
I would ask her to stand by that statement and resolve this now. It's almost 7 years we have been campaigning to get this corrected. All we're asking for is parity with our peers. We've struggled, we've been traumatised and stressed for 7 years. Enough is enough.
We are the forgotten few. Our husbands paid the price, but that injustice remains. We're not asking for anything that isn't rightfully ours.
Well, let's talk to Mary Moreland, who featured in Mark's film there and joins us now. Morning to you. It's good to see you. Do you hold out any hope on this?
Well, there's always hope. You know, we've had support from both Houses of Parliament throughout the time. I mean, I've spoken with many ministers of defence and they're very supportive. You know, in 2018, Liz Truss made a commitment, said it was a fundamental injustice. In 2019, Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, directed officials, it's reported she directed officials to find a solution to this scandal. We've had the Archbishop of Canterbury last year saying that it was wrong. It was a great wrong, I think, were his words. So I do hold out hope. If you think about it, the first duty of government is the defence of the realm. And it's the armed forces that fulfil that responsibility on the behalf of the government. And they have to, during their time and their service, they make sacrifices and they face great danger. And sometimes they face injury, serious injury, and even death as a result of that duty and carrying out that duty. And we often hear Prime Ministers and ministers say that families play a vital role in supporting our armed forces going forward and being able to serve for the operational effectiveness. And we have the Armed Forces Covenant, which has directed the nation. There's a moral obligation there. And they talk about deserving respect and support and fair treatment. And those are not my words. Those are the words of the Armed Forces Covenant. And, you know, if you think about that moral obligation, the respect and the support and fair treatment, there's nothing about it until you remarry or cohabit. So these ladies, they deserve parity with their peers. And when the law changed in 2015, even David Cameron at that time thought that he had corrected a grotesque injustice. Those are Dr. Julian Lewis's words. So, yeah, I do hold out hope that that the government will do the right thing. And if whoever becomes the next Prime Minister, I think it's time to correct this injustice. And they need to direct their officials to sort it out now and not just give more words.
Yeah, and, the words grotesque injustice, just explain it so perfectly. But, talk us through, you weren't personally affected by this in the sense that, your pension wasn't, but you lost your husband during active service. You know what it is to be a war widow. These are women who have their lives shattered. And as you described, these are people who were repeatedly told that they're propping up the forces and keeping it going in the difficult circumstances. But when they're needed, in their hour of need, then they're betrayed.
Yeah. I think war widows and military widows in general are disadvantaged by the very fact that there isn't a serving person or there isn't a veteran in the family. They tend to be forgotten. They're of no more use to the service, so they get forgotten. And it is despicable. It's reprehensible that this is happening. The law, as I say, David Cameron thought he had changed the law. He even in 2015, in an answer to Angus Robertson in the House, referred back and he said he had everybody that had remarried should have their pensions. He thought he had sorted it. But 7 years on, we're still fighting for this to be sorted, and it's wrong.
Well,
the military
Mary,
has this great.
Forgive us, we're out of time, so we've got to leave it there. But you make such a strong argument, and let's hope that someone who could be getting the keys to number 10 is listening. Thank you very much indeed.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay with us. After the break, we'll have all the latest for you on the case of Archie Battersby. But first of all, here's your Thursday morning forecast.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south. Dry today, and in fact the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news though if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast. Generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week. But again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south. As the race for number 10 intensifies, we are giving you the chance to get to know our next Prime Minister. We've invited the two candidates to meet you, the GB News viewers, and let you put your questions to them. Head directly to gbnews.uk or send me your questions to questions@gbnews.uk.
Join Alistair Stewart for the People's Forum with Liz Truss. Wednesday at 5, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Archie Battersby's family given until 9 o'clock to launch a new legal bid or life support will be turned off.
Good morning. It's just after 7 o'clock on Thursday, the 4th of August. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Stephen.
This is what's leading the news for you this morning. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says the legal battle to maintain her son's life support is at an end after the European Court said it would not interfere with the UK court's ruling.
Well, life support is now expected to be withdrawn at 11 a.m. this morning, unless an application requesting Archie be moved to a hospice is now submitted, and that has to happen before 9 o'clock.
The Health Secretary, or former Health Secretary, I should say, Javid has endorsed Liz Truss for the Conservative leadership in another blow to Rishi Sunak. The two candidates will go head-to-head once more in a debate tonight.
And the Bank of England delivers its latest interest rate decision at midday as the UK faces recession. Rates are expected to go up again, raising costs for millions of borrowers.
We'd love to hear from you this morning. Loads of emails coming in already. Keep them coming. gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News.
Or just read a quick one. Just a couple
on.
of quick ones on the drought. Jeff says, how can the water boards lecture us on conserving water when they allow millions of gallons to go to waste in leakage? Ian says, water companies are supposed to supply us with water, so they need to spend some of their profit on desalinisation plants and stop relying on rain. Keep those thoughts coming in.
Now, the mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says their legal battle has come to an end.
The 12-year-old's life support will be turned off this morning unless the family can now submit an application to the High Court to have him moved to a hospice.
Well, let's remind you of Archie's story. And on the 7th of April, he was found unresponsive at home and was taken to Southend Hospital.
On the 13th of June, the High Court in London concluded that Archie was brain stem dead. That was based on MRI results, and they decided that life support treatment can indeed be ended.
On June 25th, judges on the Court of Appeal agree with the High Court that life support can end.
On the 28th of July, the Supreme Court says it will not intervene in the case, supporting the Court of Appeal ruling.
A day later, on the 29th, the family made an application to a UN committee to consider the case, and that led to the government calling for a review 2 days later.
And yesterday, on the 3rd of August, Archie's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, who themselves refused the application to intervene in the case.
Well, let's get the latest from Ellie Costello, who's outside the hospital this morning. Ellie, good morning to you. I mean, there's nothing about this which isn't absolutely tragic.
It really is, and it does seem as though the family have now accepted that they have come to the end of this legal fight. Holly Dance, who is Archie Battersby's mother, she said yesterday that she promised her son she would fight this to the end, and she says that's exactly what I've done. And this is after the European Court of Human Rights, they refused that application from Archie Battersby's parents to delay any changes to his treatment. They said they couldn't intervene in UK court rulings. Now, this won't come as a surprise to many legal experts. As you may remember, a similarly tragic case of Charlie Gard in 2017. The ECHR refused to get involved in that case because they didn't want to intervene in a UK court's decision, and that's exactly what happened yesterday as well. It does mean that all legal options have now been exhausted. The Battersby family have lost in every court in the UK, twice in the High Court, once in the Appeal Court, and finally in the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. And all of the judges have said the same thing. They consider Archie to be brainstem dead, and he has no prospect of any meaningful recovery. So this means that Archie Battersby's life support will be switched off at 11 o'clock this morning unless his family lodge a separate legal bid to move him to a hospice. And my understanding is that the lawyers are working hard right now and they are planning on submitting that new legal bid.
And Ellie, you know, the hospitals have argued against that. They've previously been given this request, haven't they, saying that it could lead to a more chaotic end for Archie. And of course, his interests are always first and foremost in their minds. But tell us why do the family want to move him to a hospice? And I was also hearing that Holly Dance, Archie's mother, has been approached by medics from Italy and from Japan as well, with suggestions that they could provide treatment for him.
Well, Isabel, there's been huge tension between the hospital and Archie Battersby's parents throughout his medical care. They've been at loggerheads on how best to treat him, and ultimately the crux of their tension is between who should have the ultimate say on a child's medical care. Should it be the doctors and specialists, or should it be the parents? And Archie Battersby's parents feel like not enough weight has been given to their preferences, and it's come right down to the bitter end now and about where Archie should die. His parents, especially his mother, Holly Dance, she wants her son to spend his last few days, weeks, months, it depends how long Archie can go on for. Nobody knows the answer to that question, but she would like him to be in a hospice. She says she wants to be away from the noise and the chaos of the hospital behind us. And she also is not afraid of saying to reporters that she feels like the hospital has failed Archie. She doesn't want him to die inside those hospital walls. Well, Barts Health NHS Trust, they say in a statement that their deepest sympathies remain with Archie's family, and we aim to provide the best possible support to everyone at this difficult time. Now, they have previously said that they wouldn't want Archie to be moved to a hospice. They say that to move him at this late stage will only cause him to deteriorate quicker, and they say it's not in his best interest to move him now. Yesterday, Holly Dance did mention to reporters that countries such as Japan and Italy, they had come forward, they had offered care to Archie, and she was very keen yesterday. She was still gripping at hope that perhaps Archie Archie could go abroad to receive treatment there, but it is very unlikely that if the hospital will not grant Archie permission to go to a local hospice, then it's very unlikely that he would be taken abroad for treatment. So it does seem as though Archie's parents are going to lodge this new legal bid at 9 o'clock this morning.
OK, Ellie, thanks very much indeed, and we'll keep you up to date with that, of course. Let's turn our attention this morning to politics. Loads of you getting in touch on politics. And not surprising, the way we're all facing things at the minute. Brett says the government don't care about people in poverty. They're just hoping everyone struggling with the cost of living will just sort it out themselves.
Barry says if you cut tax, then people can pay their bills, spend in the high street, which is good for the shops, jobs, farmers and fishermen. Problem with that, Barry, is it's bad for inflation, which is obviously the argument against it.
Yeah. Suzanne says the reason Rishi is failing to get more support is that people don't feel that he is committed to Britain, whereas Liz is, which is interesting. And Rishi Sunak has suffered another setback in his battle to become Britain's next Prime Minister after Sajid Javid decided to back his rival, Liz Truss.
Well, both candidates were grilled by Tory members at a hustings in Cardiff last night, and Liz Truss spoke about how she planned to win over voters.
I think as somebody who is from not a Conservative background, who, I've got friends in other parties, my family, lots of them don't support the Conservatives, but I know how to convince people and how to bring people on board. So I think being a convert is actually an asset, because what do we have to do at the election? We have to convert people. We can't just talk to ourselves. We actually have to go there and win in the country.
Well, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak emphasised his plans for tackling immigration.
We need to move away from the ECHR definition of asylum, right? It is, yes, you're right, we should clap that because it's important, right? It is far too broad and allows lefty lawyers to exploit it and frustrate our efforts. So I think we should move to the Refugee Convention, which is another international legal standard, but it is narrower and tighter and will give us a greater ability to say to people, you can't stay. We have this slightly absurd situation that we'll go and talk to a country about signing a trade deal with them and giving them access to our market. We'll even go further and say, actually, here's some aid from our aid budget to help you. And whilst we're doing all of that, we slightly neglect to say, oh, hang on, can you take back your failed asylum seekers?
Well, with us now is Chris Curtis. He's head of political polling at Opinion Research. Always good to see you, Chris. I suppose the big news this morning, really, in terms of the campaigns, is the endorsement of Sajid Javid, former Chancellor, but of course, most recently Health Secretary. But it was his time in the Treasury with Rishi Sunak that makes this such a big blow for Rishi.
Oh, completely. But one thing I would say is that he made that endorsement within an hour of a poll coming out, pretty much showing beyond any reasonable doubt that Liz Truss is going to win this contest anyway, 34 points ahead in this Conservative home poll. So I think some people would see this endorsement as him backing the horse that is so far ahead. It's almost certainly going to be first over the line, knowing that that's him maximising his chance of getting a cabinet job in the next administration.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we can see it from that point of view.
You don't even have to be that cynical.
Well,
I don't
no,
think.
but in terms of Liz Truss's campaign, it's actually very helpful, isn't it? As people are getting the ballot papers through, to get these continual endorsements in case their views were waning on her a little bit.
Yeah, and momentum is such a big thing in these races because it leads to the endorsements, and everybody does want to back that winning horse. And Liz Truss has pretty much had momentum all the way through this race from the moment she ended up getting onto the final two on the ballot paper. That seems to just be continuing, and at this moment in time, it's very likely that she's going to end up being Prime Minister in September.
OK, well, let's bring in Jonathan Porteous now. He's a Professor of Economics at King's College London, and we'll return to you in just a moment, Chris. You're also a former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office. I'm really interested to get your views on some of the comments that Sajid Javid made as he endorsed Liz Truss yesterday evening. He came out and said that we were in danger of sleepwalking into a high-tax, low-growth economy, and he also said that Liz Truss was the candidate to challenge the status quo. Do you agree with those points?
I certainly agree that we have a risk of having low growth. We've had, as both candidates have ironically pointed out, we've had 10 years of low growth. And it's quite funny for me, who served in the government as a civil servant in the 1980s for the 2010s, to hear two people who've been in government for a very long time describing the last 10 years as a complete failure from the growth point of view. And of course, they're right. The last 10 years of austerity and its aftermath have indeed given us low growth. But I don't see much evidence that either of them has any particular ideas to boost growth. This focus on tax cuts as the way of boosting growth over the medium to long term really has relatively little economic support. At the same time, we see both candidates planning further quite significant cuts in school spending, which of course, education is one of the things we actually need to boost growth over the medium to long term. And it would be nice to hear them talking about what their plans are for actually boosting the UK education system. That's going to make a lot more difference over to growth in the longer term.
Yeah, but the reality is, I guess, it depends who they're appealing to, doesn't it? And obviously growth is a good message to get out there. But the reality is people want tax cuts because they just don't have enough money.
Well, that's right, but a lot of the tax cuts that we're hearing them talk about will basically go to people like me, for example, who don't actually, of course, I'd like a tax cut. Who wouldn't? I would like more money. But the real threat, as the forecast from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research showed yesterday, is of very large numbers of people falling into destitution, of literally not being able to pay their bills. And tax cuts that are concentrated on the better off, which is what both candidates are proposing, are going to do little or nothing to help that. If they wanted to actually help people who are going to be really struggling with their bills, they would be talking about further direct support for people who can't pay their bills, and increase the universal credit, which of course the government reversed recently. The government has made very large cuts to universal credit and other benefits over the past few years. If you actually really wanted to help the people who needed it, that's what they would be talking about, not about tax cuts. So it's quite unfortunate that we're actually talking about tax cuts that will go mostly to people at the upper end of the income distribution, rather than to the people who really need it.
That's interesting, though. I mean, from a Conservative perspective, you've got to say it's one thing to focus on the working poor. It's another thing to focus on changes to benefits, isn't it? I mean, a focus on the working poor.
The working poor people get benefits. Remember, universal credit goes to poor people who are in work and out of work. If you want to focus on the working poor, a cut in the basic rate of income tax, it simply is not the right way to do it.
Okay.
That's very clear, right? If you wanted an increase in universal credit, gives much more to working, poor, low-income working families than a cut in the basic rate of income tax. Every economist knows that. The Treasury know that. The candidates are choosing not, of course, to focus on that.
I want to focus on what the Bank of England is expected to announce at midday today. We're expecting the biggest rise in interest rates in almost 30 years. And we're also seeing on one of the front pages, I think this morning, quoting 15% inflation perhaps next year. Your thoughts about all of that?
The Bank of England certainly is going to increase interest rates today. Probably, I would guess, by 0.5%, although that's a guess rather than any inside knowledge. And inflation is going to continue going up. I mean, this is primarily a global phenomenon, both the rise in inflation and the rise in interest rates. And to some extent, the bank has a limited amount of room for maneuver. They can't deviate too much from what other central banks, in particular the Federal Reserve in the US, do, and they don't want to be perceived to be behind the game. So I think interest rates going up is simply a fact of life. We are, in this respect, we are in a relatively, things could be worse. For most people, this will not lead to a huge rise in mortgage payments in the short term. So it's probably not the main problem facing the UK economy.
OK, Jonathan, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Let's return to Chris Curtis. I mean, what becomes clear from talking to someone like Jonathan is whoever wins and whatever they're spouting at the moment, they're going to go into number 10 on the 5th of September facing a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, to bring this back from politics, and we should ignore the actual real-life human consequences of this and how difficult the next 12 months are going to be for so many people in this country. But just to bring it back from politics for a minute, this was always going to be an incredibly difficult 12 months for the Conservative Party. They have to get through a cost of living crisis, an NHS crisis. They're playing politics on battlefields that are not normally favourable to the Conservatives. It was going to be very hard for them at the best of times. But now they're going to be going into that with not necessarily the best policies to solve that, because over the past few months they've been focusing on policies which are sort of trying to appeal to the Conservative base rather than appealing to the country or aiming to solve this problem. But also in a situation where they haven't been sort of focusing on or talking to the country or being united behind one candidate or putting forward one vision to the country. So I really do think, with the next election on the horizon, the Tory party is in a very difficult position.
Just a quick word, because it struck me in the clips we used before. And when we clip up these things, we look for the sort of best bits from each candidate to clip it up. It's what you do, you know how it works. And with all of that, Liz Truss seemed to be on point. She seemed to be sort of quite excited, quite invigorated. Rishi Sunak just didn't seem to be. Having to tell the audience, oh yes, you should clap for this. And I don't know. There's just something isn't quite connecting somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it's always you should never necessarily judge somebody's ability to appeal to the country based on their ability to appeal to the Conservative Party base. But having said that, I think it's certainly true that Rishi Sunak has not had a particularly good campaign. And as things have started to go badly, he's also flailed around a little bit looking for a new vision and strategy. But also, I think it's fair to say that Liz Truss has had a much better campaign than many people expected. And actually, in those hustings performances, in the debate performances, she has done a bit of a better job than I think people thought that she would.
Well, you're busy polling people at the moment. You're going to have your latest figures for us in about a week or so. Yep. But for now, Chris Curtis from Opinion, thank you very much indeed.
It is 7:21 on the nose. Let's bring you up to date with some of the stories today. And almost two-thirds of people worried about the prospect of rising interest rates as the cost of living crisis continues. Figures from a new Ipsos poll show 64% say they're fairly or very concerned. That's as the Bank of England is expected to announce its largest interest rate rise in 27 years at midday today.
Katarina Johnson-Thompson has dedicated her first heptathlon title for 3 years to her late granny, who died last month after defending her Commonwealth Games crown. She beat Northern Ireland's Kate O'Connor, who took silver, and England's Jade O'Dowda in third in Birmingham.
Scientists say climate change and population growth is putting the UK's water supply under too much strain. Water companies and researchers at Portsmouth University blaming record-breaking heat waves and dry weather. This comes as South East Water imposes a hose and sprinkler ban for millions from the 12th of August.
So we've been talking about that hosepipe ban this morning. A couple of the papers quoting suggestions that we ought to spy on our neighbours. Grasshopper Granny was one of the headlines this morning that caught my eye. Trace in Shropshire's got in touch that I wouldn't snitch on my neighbours watering their grass or their gardens. I'd admire its lushness and then I'd carry on being good. I think I'd probably do the same.
Yeah. Oh, I admire the lushness. I like that. Ask if you can go around and have a picnic on their lawn or something. David in Lincolnshire says it stands to reason that in hot weather, when the ground dries out, that more leaking water would be absorbed into the ground. What amazes me is that no one wants to take responsibility for correcting a problem which is getting worse by the year. Hosepipe bans are not the long-term answer.
And it just comes back to that point, doesn't it, that we're all made to feel bad if you're filling up a paddling pool for your little ones when we're, in the middle of another heat wave. Next week, temperatures over 30 again. And yet these water boards, what was it, 2.4 billion litres of water leaking every day. And then the responsibility seems to be on us. Banning the hosepipe, no washing of your car, Stephen, and I know how much you love to wash your car.
I never wash my car.
You don't get the marigolds out and...
No, I do not. No, my car's a disgrace, ladies and gentlemen. I'm too lazy to wash it, so there you go. So I don't do that. But I do
Someone else does it for
I do like to. I do like to water the garden. Keep it looking lush.
Well, I must point out, you're not in a hosepipe ban area.
No, I'm not.
So you're allowed to do that. That's
no.
Okay.
And if I was, I'd have to stop, wouldn't I? I'm not going to risk £1,000 fine. £1,000? No.
Keep your thoughts coming in. Get in touch, as always, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. We're going to take a quick break. After that, Aidan McGee is here with all the latest from the Commonwealth Games.
Good morning, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south. Dry today, and in fact, the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news, though, if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast. Generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week. But again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's just before 7:30. Still to come on the programme this morning at 7:45, we'll be talking to the Labour Party. They're accusing the Tories of turning the country into backlog Britain. But are they just playing politics? We'll ask the Shadow International Development Secretary.
At 8:45, we're talking to the former leadership contender and now Liz Truss supporter, Suella Braverman, and asked why she thinks the Foreign Secretary is the best person for the job.
Well, also, and about her big war on woke, which will be really interesting. She's in the front of the Daily Mail this morning talking about how she stopped all those diversity criteria in her department. We're talking to her, as you said, 8:45, was that? Yeah.
Yes.
And lots of emails coming in talking to us about war widows this morning and hosepipe bans and all the rest of it. Keep those thoughts coming in at gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
What I love about what we do is that all views are welcome. You know, and we don't, despite what you may hear out there, all views are welcome, and including this on the war widow scheme, which is where if you're a war widow prior to 2015, there's about 300 people now fall under this, that if they remarry, then they lose their spouse's pension. And they're calling for that to be changed. Steve says, I won't be popular for saying this, but changing the policy was wrong in the first place. A war widow should be supported, but once remarried and supported by another person, they should not profit from the death of their partner. To suggest the pension is some form of reminder of the deceased, which was what one person said in our package earlier on, our VT, is distasteful.
Well, I suspect there'll be lots of people who disagree. Let us know your thoughts this morning. David Cameron called it a grotesque... what was the phrase he used now? I've forgotten. The grotesque miscarriage of justice. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll try and bring those to you just as soon as we can.
Yeah, I respect you, Steve, for saying it, though. And, you know, because we need to hear all sides, even when it comes to something as sort of delicate as this, you still need to hear all sides. So well done for saying it. I don't know if many people would agree with you, but that's your view and you're entitled to it. So thank you for that.
So Aidan McGee joins us now to talk all things Commonwealth Games and talking about sort of emotive stories like the War Widow story there. Katarina Johnson-Thompson has the most amazing story of overcoming adversity and personal tragedy.
Exactly. Now, when you study athletics quite closely, as I've had to do recently and throughout my career, actually, you know, it's withstood some ferocious knocks in the last 30 years. It's been addled with drugs at certain points, but the stories between all the competitors and what they go through from event to event really are what grab the imagination more than the actual sport itself sometimes. Now, what's interesting is that Katarina Johnson-Thompson was a real celebrated medal hope back in London 2012. She finished 13th in the heptathlon at the age of 19. What's difficult between tournaments is that, or between events, is there's so much time between events. It's a little bit like when I worked at the News of the World. If I made a fool of myself for the newspaper, I had to wait a week before I could atone for it. Now, this lot have to wait months, sometimes a year. You know, if you're a footballer, for example, and you score an own goal on a Saturday, well, the chances are you've got a game on Tuesday. You can put things right quite quickly. These guys have to stew over it over a long, long time. Yeah. As you say, Katarina Johnson-Thompson has yesterday announced it represented a degree of bloodletting because she lost her grandmother on Monday. If you go back to last week, I mean, 8th in the World Championship, she would have expected to do better than that. Now, we talked about the scheduling last week, didn't we, and how everything, the World Championships followed by the Commonwealth Games, followed by the Euros, backed onto each other, hasn't helped the athletes in terms of recovery with injury. One thing it's done with Katarina Johnson-Thompson, or KJT as she's known, it's allowed her to come back, exactly, it's allowed her to come back very quickly and atone for what happened last week. Now, her points total of 6,377, it's 600 shy of her personal best. It's also in a field that is not possibly the best that you could go up alongside. You certainly would go against stronger in the Worlds and in the Olympics. But nonetheless, given everything she's been through, all the injuries, everything she's suffered in the last 3 or 4 years, she's been dogged by injury for about the last 3 years. So to come back and achieve that yesterday, and the heptathlon, it demands so much of you because it's multi-event. And so to do that,
it's just tiring thinking about it.
I know, especially at this time in the morning.
Yeah.
So an outstanding achievement, another medal, Team England second in the medal table now as well, so that's good. But it was the emotion when she was interviewed last night, the tears, the welling up. We've seen it quite a lot in this Commonwealth Games as well.
I tell you what, talking to sort of backstories and things in all of this, the McColgans.
Yeah, this is another outstanding one.
I mean, this is lovely, isn't it?
Well, exactly. I remember Liz McColgan. She won at the Worlds in Edinburgh in 1986 in her native Scotland. She followed that up 4 years later with a win in Auckland in 1990. She was one of the most celebrated athletes of the early 90s, at a time when athletics really was front and centre of sports coverage in this country. Everybody knew who our leading protagonists were in that particular discipline. Fast forward 30 years, her daughter Eilish McColgan went and won the 10,000-metre event yesterday, same event as her mum did, at a better time. At the age of 31, she's timed her run late, if you pardon the pun, to really achieve success. She's also gone through huge adversity as well. I mean, again, injuries, changes of coaches. She had COVID recently as well, which really did knock the stuffing out of her. So to come back last night, and it was such an exciting race. I mean, it went over 30 minutes, so it does take a little bit of time to get going. But she was up against a calibre opponent in Irene Sheptal of Kenya, and it was the last few hundred metres where she really came into her own. It was one of those old-school Cram versus Ovet or Ovet versus Co, you know, the ones where they're really vying, and it was a really grandstand finish. It's not as if she was leading from halfway through and never relinquished. I mean, she didn't look back until she hit the line to make sure she was over the line, and then there were the tears. And Liz McColgan, her mother, was just in the front row on the perimeter of the best seats in the house at the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham, as you'd imagine, and she said, it's not just the fact that she did it in my event. It's not just the fact that she's overcome adversity. This is about mother celebrating daughter, achieved something special on the track, and that's why I really enjoyed it.
I want to talk to you about taking the knee. Premier League have decided it's time to stop.
Well, it wasn't the Premier League who decided, actually, it was the players, and it was interesting, because I was at the front and centre of this back in June 2020 at my previous employers. I went from, I mean, the Premier League made a decision overnight, and this included all the broadcasters as well, and that means, you know, the broadcasters are in thrall to the Premier League because all their business network, or their business model is predicated on Premier League rights. They have to do as they're told. But it was the Premier League who decreed that players must start taking the knee. And what was interesting is that in the last few days, they said, oh, we're going to leave it to the players. We're going to leave it to the players. So if there was any pushback from sponsors, if anyone did kick off on social media, they were going to blame a bunch of 25-year-olds sitting in a room who didn't make the decision in the first place. Now, the alarm bells were ringing long ago. The Premier League has nobody within it who has any kind of political awareness. You don't invite politics into your sport. Fans don't want to. I've never met a fan who goes, you know what, I like the goals, I like the games, I like the trophies, you know, I like the players, but we need a bit more. We need a bit more politics in our sport. You know, it's ludicrous. So the Premier League played with fire.
It carries power, doesn't it? When it comes to things like the Russian invasion.
Yes, but it's inextricably linked. It is, but that's generally not a good thing. It causes more problems. If the Premier League really cared about stuff like this, they're always into gestures, stuff that doesn't involve spending any money.
Oh
yeah, you know, it's armbands, it's taking the knee, it's just gesture
Laces,
politics by big companies. I asked a friend of mine, I said, what do you think he's achieved in the last couple of years taking the knee? He looked at me as if I'd pinched his last Rolo. You know, so what's interesting is that it's just a passing of the buck, passing it on to players. You know, players aren't politically aware necessarily, they're there to play football. I was having to interview managers 2 years ago about Black Lives Matter, and they were saying they're like middle-aged white blokes, and they're going, I thought we were here to discuss hamstrings and team formation and team pattern and team shape and league tables and stuff like that. They didn't really get it. And as I say, when you started getting quite quickly prominent black players, Les Ferdinand, Lyle Taylor of Nottingham Forest, Wilfred Zaha, one of the best players in the Premier League, saying, this is doing nothing for us. The Premier League should have pushed back then. When they also said, oh, this has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, we're not supporting Black Lives Matter. A little bit late for that, when you've got Black Lives Matter written on the back of the players' shirts. You've got it in the corner of Stadia as well, and it's there front and centre for everybody to see. So it's taken a long time to get to this point, but I think it's for the good of the game.
OK. Aidan, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Will you please have a day off soon?
Yeah, I've got one in 3 months' time.
Oh, excellent. Lovely. I look forward to that then.
We're going to take a very quick break. After that, we'll be back with David Wooding and Baroness Claire Fox. See you in a sec.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
7:39, morning to you. Time to take you through the papers, and with us once again today, political editor of The Sun on Sunday, David Wooding with a tan, and director of the Academy of Ideas, Baroness Claire Fox. Morning to you both. Claire, let's start with the Mail, should we? And Suella Braverman, who we're going to be talking to a little bit later on this morning, looking at diversity.
So this story's already been causing a lot of comment, which is the headline says, "Ditch the woke witch trial," says Law Chief. And actually, it was on GB News that I heard Kemi Badenoch, who had been standing for the Tory leadership, saying she doesn't really like that notion of war on woke because it can sound a bit trivial. And I with her 100% on that. However, there is something, and she made the point that this is actually quite a serious question. And if you actually look at it, what Suella Braverman's saying is that in her department, she was horrified to discover, as it says here, that hundreds of government lawyers spent nearly 2,000 hours of taxpayer-funded time last year attending lectures on micro-incivilities, lived experience, how to be a straight ally, courtesy of Stonewall, experts on white privilege sharing their insight. Now, I think that there is a point here, which is that this sort of notion that the civil service has kind of been highly politicised behind the scenes is happening under the auspices of this equality, diversity and inclusion agenda. Now, when you hear those words, I'm for equality. I don't want to exclude people, so I'm into inclusion. And diversity sounds like a very good thing. But it's become a watchword for a particular, very prescriptive, narrow political agenda. And if you don't go along with it, that's when you can get yourselves labelled transphobic, racist. And so if you challenge a notion like white privilege, which I think is a nonsense, got nothing to do with anti-racism as I've ever understood it as an anti-racist, then you should be able to have that argument at least. But these training courses are telling people there's only one way to be these things, and I think it's very good that Suella Braverman and a lot of the government are speaking out on it.
Yeah. We did a course, didn't we, about, what did they call it? Unintentional bias.
Unintended unconscious bias.
I have to say, I thought it was 90 minutes of my life I'll never get back.
It was, well, there was a big row, and I'll shut up after this, which was, when I first got in the House of Lords, there's already been this big row about this, which is that you had to do this thing called valuing others, and there was all these lords who were disciplined because they didn't do the course, and as you say, it was the most condescending course that I've ever been on, and it didn't help in any way solve or tackle any problems. And at the Academy of Ideas, we run this festival called the Battle of Ideas Festival, and we're doing a crisis of institutions themed set of debates. And we're going to do one on the crisis in the civil service, because I think there is a real problem that our civil service are becoming preoccupied by what at best were kind of pretty grim when they happened at student politics, but now they're becoming mainstreamed. It's worrying.
They've become the new Puritans, really. It's a bit like if you're not with them, you get... We're chunted, the word that's used here. It's no longer enough to say, I'm not racist. You have to actively campaign against racism and do things to show that you're not simply an unbiased person. You have to get involved with it again. There's a bit in here which I love, this quote from the piece she writes inside. Some zealots believe believe in it. Like the witch finders of the Middle Ages, they don the outfits of the Inquisitor and never tire of rooting out unbelievers. Others wear the priestly robes to ward off their rivals, while still others nod along and recite the creed because they are too scared to dissent.
Great quote, that. Yeah, it is good. The one thing I disagree with, and I would, is that she puts it down to left-wing thinking. Now, as a left-winger, I'd just like to point out, it's not a left that I identify with. This is part of the identitarian politics of the day that goes along with identity politics in a very particular version of critical theory, which I won't bore everybody with, but, you know, like critical race theory. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I don't think we should let the right off the hook here, because I think it goes beyond left and right, in other words. A lot of this has come in under the auspices of a Conservative government, after all, right? I mean, these are led by people who are often Conservative voters, and we had that bit of a row about Penny Mordaunt, who was one of the chief people in terms of Parliament who was arguing for a lot of this stuff, you know, that to go on. So I just think it's not a left-right issue, but it's a serious issue. And if you fall foul of this, if you, for example, said, I don't want to do this course, as has been pointed out, it's assumed that that's unconscious bias. You know, that if you challenge something, they will say to you, maybe it's your white privilege that means that you won't do it. Absolutely. So I think it's a scary moment that we should all be opposed to.
David, I'm really glad you chose this story. I was leafing through the papers this morning and it's tucked away inside The Sun, but it absolutely fascinated me. Tell us all about how pig hearts, there's so much hope in how they're sort of possibly going to be used further in transplants in the future.
Well, taking it to its extreme, it's saying that it can bring people back to life. That is taking it to an extreme view. What it really means is that when a heart stops beating, because the blood isn't going around the body, your vital organs, your liver, your kidneys and other cells are all destroyed within a short period of time. What they did, this experiment, the scientists in Yale University, was to stop the heart of a pig. It was anaesthetised. And then an hour later put a mixture of chemicals and oxygen and so forth through the heart, and it started pumping again. And not only did the cells and the organs come back to life, they were revived and recovered quite well. Now there's a long.
What about the brain?
There's nothing said about the brain in this. It doesn't mention the brain per se in this article, but it's a very first step towards. Say, for instance, you have a heart attack or you drown and they get you out and then revive you and your heart has stopped for a period of time. If they catch you in a certain amount of time in the future, they may be able to do something to bring people back.
It's a fantastically exciting story, isn't it? And it does remind you that medical science can be a wonderful thing. And I think medical science has come in for something of a battering because of cynical attitudes to what happened with the pandemic and so on. So this is a positive reminder of the brilliance of medical doctors working on experimentation. The big thing for me is transplants, because at the moment, you know, there's such a limited amount of time that somebody who tragically dies, that their organs can be used in terms of transplants. There's so many people waiting for transplants. And it makes the point here that at the very least, it could be used in terms of transplanting organs. So it's a very life-affirming story, and we need a few of them at the moment.
Absolutely.
It's just that it's the brain which worries me.
Well,
it's like, because my understanding is the brain can only last for sort of 4 to 6 minutes or something without oxygen.
I mean, mine doesn't last for that long. The best of time.
I don't know.
I understand, but I don't think it's going to mean life everlasting for everyone. But I think it's in those instances, as you say, where
it's another tool in the.
It's another tool.
Yes,
let's have a look at The Guardian and looking at the far right web, Claire.
So I've raised this story because. This is the idea that children and young people are being targeted by this infrastructure of far-right groomers who are ensnaring them in extremist ideologies, and because they all had so much time unsupervised online during lockdown, it's particularly suggesting that. Now, there's a couple of things to say about it. It then goes on to say that Prevent, the counter-terrorism programme, is now sort of targeting and looking at this perfect storm of far-right indoctrination. I want to ask two things. I mean, first of all, far-right indoctrination does have to be interrogated because the term far-right is used very promiscuously in political debate today.
I was going to say, what does it mean?
Exactly. There is undoubtedly some malign far-right. I mean, you know, anyone who's kind of encountered some of those kind of like what we used to describe as the fash, there's a few of them out there. But there's a tiny number of them. Often, the Conservative government are called far-right. You know, people who voted Brexit were described as far-right. All sorts of people are described as... So you've got to query that. I also know that prevent was, for example, used in schools when people indicated that they were enthusiastic about Brexit. I was on a debate where a head teacher said, we had a mock election in our school and the majority voted Brexit in the sixth form. So we do think this is a matter of extremism growing in the school. That was before the referendum, and I thought, God almighty. But also, Rishi Sunak yesterday, I think, made a very dangerous statement when he said that he should be sent to prevent, which was set up, by the way, to tackle radical Islam and people joining ISIS and going off and, you know, bombing people and all the terrible things associated with that. Now you can't kind of mention that. It's all focused somewhere else. Rishi Sunak said anyone who vilified Britain could be seen as an extremist and be sent to prevent. I mean, what an illiberal, anti-British, censorious atmosphere that would create.
As you say, it's bloody blooming hugely worrying. Sorry, I do apologise.
Let's turn our attention, shall we, to a story on the front of the Telegraph, David. And this is about using cameras to catch polluting cars. Yes, all right. Well, I was trying to move swiftly on.
You have to turn those fans down in the bedroom.
Yes. Anyway, these cameras could be illegal.
Yes, Captain Loophole. What's he called? Mr. Loophole. The solicitor. Captain Loophole. He's being promoted. This is a great one for him or lawyers like him, and I'm sure they'll all be reading this with aplomb. Using these cameras, automatic number plate recognition cameras, to catch motorists may be going too far, according to the Surveillance Commissioner, Professor Fraser Sampson, who says that using them, for example, when you go into these congestion zones and then tracking down motorists and fining them if they've got a car with too many emissions might be overstepping the mark, and it might be too much of a big brother
I've only
issue.
just realised this now. I mean, these ULEZ cameras have been operating on the end of my road for quite a while now.
Absolutely. Well, there's something like 400 of these cameras, and it cost about £130 million. And there's, I think in London, 130,000 notices have been sent out. So this is an issue that perhaps motorists might start using in their defence if they get a ticket through the...
Well, yeah. I don't understand ULEZ.
Ultra-low emission zone.
Oh, yeah, but it's like, how do you know if your car's...
Ultra-low or not?
I mean, what's that all about? I don't get it.
You know, that's
so modern.
Ignorance is no excuse in the law, apparently. But but what I was going to say was, like, I think that we all understood the way that cameras were used initially in terms of speeding. But they've become a very lucrative way for councils, for example, to make money, even in terms of speeding. I mean, I'm from North Wales. The police force have made a fortune there. I mean, you literally can't drive, you know, at all without being picked up by a camera. But this is much more moralistic, isn't it? Because this is about emissions.
Yeah.
And it starts to say you're driving the wrong kind of car. And I do think that notion of the war on the motorist does feel real. State overreach and surveillance is something we should all, again, have
in
some
praise
concern.
of automatic number plate recognition, when I parked at the airport to go on holiday, I'd booked in advance with my car number.
Yeah.
And you just drive up to the gate, it opens, you go through, you park. When you come back again, let you out. No messing around with tickets. It's great.
Yeah.
The only
police use it all the time to catch criminals whizzing across the country, and you know, we'd all, presumably, I don't know about you, Claire, but most of us would say that's a good thing.
No, but that's what I'm saying is technology is always got two sides to it, right? I'm making the point that when the state starts spying on people for what I think... These are legal activities, right? This is a moralistic view of what kind of car you should drive.
Yeah.
I think that's very different than criminals speeding around the country, you know, threatening lives and limbs,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. TikTok.
On technology?
Yes.
So this is a classic story, I think. So it was just announced, I think only a week ago, that the Speaker from the House of Commons and the Speaker from the House of Lords were launching the Parliamentary TikTok accounts.
I mean...
Now, inevitably, this was
why?
this was inevitably based on the idea that in order to make themselves relevant, all the MPs and members of the House of Lords, like me, had to do was to open a TikTok account, and then all young people would go, isn't politics fascinating? So, on the one hand, this is an example of dumbing down. Within a week, a few people have said, isn't TikTok owned by the Chinese state, and aren't we meant to be panicking about that? Now, and then, so they've banned it. Now, that seems to me a bit mad, because, to be honest with you, if the Chinese state have got nothing better to do than to watch MPs trying to be relevant to 17-year-olds in the UK.
You get to see inside their offices and all sorts of footage.
That's apparently, but I mean, to be honest, that already happens. And I use social media to talk about politics all the time, and I do a thing called Inside the Lords, where I talk about what's happening inside the Lords, because I think as we're making laws, people should know about it. So I think there's a bit of paranoia about the China thing, but it just made me laugh that this was a kind of attempt at being all modern and trendy, and then like, oh God, sorry.
You're going to have to do deaf dances, all that sort of thing on your TikTok. What you got to do. Lovely, thank you both. Interesting, because we were talking about water, weren't we, in the last hour? Chris in Blackpool. Morning, Chris. Hope Blackpool's all lovely this morning. Saying, we haven't had a new reservoir for 30 years. And the population has increased by 10 million in that time.
Yeah, Marcus says, once again, it's the end of the world because the southeast of the country has no water. We have plenty up here in Scotland.
Yeah.
We've also had an email in, I forget your name, so forgive me, but you're from Burnham-on-Sea this morning saying, I'm listening to all this talk of droughts and it's raining here. Lovely for the sheep. So, yeah, it's not right across the country. Fair enough.
Tony in North Lincolnshire says, we've got a national grid for electricity and gas, but not for water. The ability to move water around the country would reduce some of the recent problems. Yeah, a bit blooming expensive, though, put in. Cool. But it's, you know, fair point. If it had been done 100 years ago, maybe we'd be in a different ballgame now.
Yeah. Keep those thoughts coming in. We love to hear from you. We're going to take a quick break. After that, we'll be talking about the very latest in the Archie Battersby case, as his family's now appealing to have him moved to a hospice. That's after your forecast.
Good morning, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south. Dry today, and in fact, the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news, though, if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast, generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week, but again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
As the race for number 10 intensifies, we are giving you the chance to get to know our next Prime Minister. We've invited the two candidates to meet you, the GB News viewers, and let you put your questions to them. Head directly to gbnews.uk or send me your questions to questions@gbnews.uk.
Join Alistair Stewart for the People's Forum with Liz Truss. Wednesday at 5, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Archie Battersby's family are given until 9 o'clock this morning to launch a new legal bid. All life support will be turned off.
Morning to you. It's Thursday, the 4th of August. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Stephen.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says the legal battle to maintain her son's life support is at an end after the European Court said it would not interfere with the UK's court ruling.
Life support is expected to be withdrawn at 11 this morning unless an application requesting he be moved to a hospice is submitted by 9 o'clock.
The former Health Secretary, Javid, has endorsed Liz Truss for the Conservative leadership in another blow to Rishi Sunak. The two candidates will go head-to-head once more in a leadership debate tonight.
And the Bank of England is going to deliver its latest interest rate decision at midday as the UK apparently faces recession. Rates expected to go up again, raising the costs for millions of borrowers.
Well, lots of emails coming in thick and fast this morning. Thank you so much for doing that. Lots of you getting in touch on the drought, on the hosepipe bans, and indeed on the widow pension stories that we've been covering. We'll have more for you on that this hour. If you've got any thoughts, get involved in the conversation. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
Marcus says, I don't know if we did this last hour or not, I'm just having a bit of a brain fog now. Marcus says, so once again, it's the end of the world because the southeast of the country has no water. We've got plenty up here in Scotland. Did you?
Yeah, I did do it, but you know what? It was so good. It was well worth reading again.
But that's what I always think is we do. The media generally focuses on what's happening because look at the papers. There's sorry, Isabel. Let me grab this metro for example. It's all there's Greenwich Park on the front of the metro. You know, great if you live in London
yes,
or whatever.
But wait, the best one. You've missed the best one. This is Grasshopper Granny, and it has a picture of a granny in her pop socks and her rollers. But yeah, you're right. It's a media frenzy.
It's a media frenzy
because
it's down here in the south of the country, and if you're anywhere north of about Watford, then you're probably doing all right. But it drives me mad. As a northerner, it drives me mad.
Judith says flooding in the winter, drought in the summer, sewage dumped in the sea, total mismanagement by the water companies and by politicians. Thanks for your thoughts. Thanks for taking the time. We do read lots of them, and we try and read out as many as we can.
We certainly do. Now, the top story this morning, and the mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says their legal battle has now come to an end.
So the 12-year-old's life support machine will be turned off this morning unless the family can submit an application now to the High Court to have him moved to a hospice.
So this is the timeline, if you like, of Archie's story. And on the 7th of April, he was found unresponsive at home and was taken to Southend Hospital.
On the 13th of June, the High Court in London concluded that Archie is brainstem dead, which was based on MRI results, and they decided then that life support could be ended.
On the 25th of June, judges in the Court of Appeal agreed with the High Court that life support could end.
It was then taken by the family to the Supreme Court, who said that they would not intervene in the case, and they supported the Court of Appeal ruling as well.
A day later, on the 29th, the family made an application to a UN committee to consider the case. That led to the government calling for a review 2 days later.
And then yesterday, Archie's parents appealed to the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, who also refused the application to intervene in the case.
Well, let's talk to our reporter, Ellie Costello, who's outside the hospital for us this morning. So it seems then, Ellie, that all legal avenues have been absolutely exhausted here.
Yes, it does seem that way. This is a tragic set of circumstances, and even though we're coming to the end of this story, there will be no winners and there will be no happy ending. Archie Battersby's life support is planned to be switched off at 11 o'clock this morning. That is unless his parents can submit another last-minute legal bid, this time to move Archie to a hospice. Now, I have just been told that their lawyers are working really hard on that last-minute legal bid. The deadline is at 9 o'clock this morning. I do think it's going to come right down to the wire with this one. Now, of course, this comes as last night the European Court of Human Rights, they refused an application from Archie's parents to delay any changes to his treatment. They said they couldn't intervene in any UK court rulings, and perhaps that won't come as a surprise to legal experts who said yesterday that legal precedent was not in the family's favour. You might remember the case in 2017 of Charlie Gard, which were similar tragic circumstances, and even then the ECHR said they couldn't intervene in UK court rulings, and that's exactly what they said yesterday with Archie Battersby's case, and that follows defeats for Archie's parents in all UK courts, twice in the High Court, once in the Appeal Court, and finally in the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. All of the judges saying pretty much the same thing. They consider Archie to be brainstem dead, and they say there is no prospect for any meaningful recovery. They say it's in his best interest for his treatment to be withdrawn. So it does seem at this point as though every legal avenue has been taken. All that remains is that final legal bid now to move Archie to hospice care. That deadline is at 9 o'clock and it is fast approaching.
Was posted on what you hear on that. We understand that in lots of these court hearings, the argument against being moved to a hospice was because it could create a more chaotic death and the risk of organ failure and heart failure and all the rest of it. Very much, though, the wishes of the family. Tell us why they really want him away from the hospital.
Well, Isabel, this is a huge point of tension between the hospital and the parents of Archie Battersby. Yesterday, Holly Dance, which is Archie Battersby's mother, she came out and spoke to reporters very emotively about the reasons why she wants her son moved to hospice care. She very much believes that the hospice has let Archie down. The hospital, has let Archie down. She doesn't want him to die within those hospital walls. She wants him to be away from the chaos and the noise, she says, of the Royal London Hospital. She wants him to be in the peace and serenity of a hospice. She was describing yesterday the fresh air, the birds tweeting and the squirrels in the garden of the hospice. She very much pictures that as the place where she'd like her son to die. Now, the hospital say that it would be not in Archie's best interest to move Archie at this point. They say if they were to move him, it would cause him to deteriorate quicker, and it's not something that they would support at this time. They have given this statement. This is from Barts Health NHS Trust. They have said that our deepest sympathies remain with Archie's family, and we aim to provide the best possible support to everyone at this difficult time. Well, yesterday, Holly Dance also mentioned that 2 countries had come forward and suggested that they could offer care to Archie. That was Japan and Italy, and she was very much clinging on to hope that perhaps they could take Archie abroad to receive that treatment. But it does seem as though if the hospital won't allow Archie to go to a local hospice, they probably won't allow him to go overseas to receive treatment. So we are fast approaching that 9 o'clock deadline now, about 50 minutes to go until his parents have to have in that late last-minute bid to move Archie to hospice care, and I do think it's going to come right down to the wire this morning.
Yeah, a really tragic story. Ellie, thank you for bringing us the latest.
Now, let's turn our attention to politics for you this morning. And Rishi Sunak has suffered another setback as he tries to become Prime Minister after Sajid Javid decided to back his rival, Liz Truss.
Well, both candidates were grilled by Tory members at a hustings in Cardiff last night. Liz Truss speaking about how she planned to try and win over voters.
I think as somebody who is from not a Conservative background, who, I've got friends in other parties, my family, lots of them don't support the Conservatives. But I know how to convince people and how to bring people on board. So I think being a convert is actually an asset, because what do we have to do at the election? We have to convert people. We can't just talk to ourselves. We actually have to go there and win in the country.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has emphasised his plans for tackling immigration.
We need to move away from the ECHR definition of asylum, right? It is, yes, you're right, we should clap that because it is important. Right, it is far too broad and allows lefty lawyers to exploit it and frustrate our efforts. So I think we should move to the Refugee Convention, which is another international legal standard, but it is narrower and tighter and will give us a greater ability to say to people, you can't stay. We have this slightly absurd situation that we'll go and talk to a country about signing a trade deal with them and giving them access to our market. We'll even go further and say, actually, here's some aid from our aid budget to help you. And whilst we're doing all of that, we slightly neglect to say, oh, hang on, can you take back your failed asylum seekers?
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's here in the studio. What did you make of it all, Tom? I mean, does it all become much of a muchness?
It is beginning to feel a bit like Groundhog Day. Of course, this was the 3rd hustings of 12. They're going around every region. We've had a hustings in Yorkshire, we've had a hustings in the southwest, and now we've had a hustings in Wales. There are many, many more to come. And even the host of last night said that sort of this might sound a bit familiar to some of you who have listened to previous hustings, although all of these messages are tailored a little bit. We heard particularly from Liz Truss some attacks there for the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, who she described as a sort of more boring Jeremy Corbyn, which is something that I think many people in Wales might relate to. But clearly what has been going on is the same sort of pledges being said. The messages remaining the same from the start of this contest, really being reiterated, this message of we need fiscal consolidation and steady as she goes on the economy from Rishi Sunak, or we need a bold change in direction and tax cuts now from Liz Truss.
Yeah, and those points of difference really underlined by the big endorsement yesterday of Sajid Javid. Now, what's interesting in all of this, I suppose, is the kind of personalities behind it, because, these are good friends, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, both resigning in quick succession, bringing down Boris Johnson, both being accused of betraying him, both having worked in the Treasury together. and yet clearly now different points of view when it comes to taxation.
Yes, both of these individuals have come into the Conservative Party. Sajid Javid in 2010, Rishi Sunak in 2015, both from migrant backgrounds, both former Chancellors of the Exchequer, both have a history in finance, both have a very similar political journey, and both of them were, of course, leadership contenders. Sajid Javid himself running a brief leadership campaign before failing to make that nomination threshold only a few weeks ago now, but it feels like a lifetime ago, looking at how fast this race has developed. But it really did seem to be the case that Sajid Javid is pushing for a change in economic direction. When he launched his leadership campaign, he was calling for the scrapping of the national insurance rise. He was calling for a more bold approach to corporation tax and the whole tax burden. So perhaps it isn't that much of a surprise, but what some commentators were saying is that maybe this is less to do with personalities, less even to do with policy, and more to do with polls. Just about half an hour before Sajid Javid announced that he was backing Liz Truss, there was a new survey out from the Conservative Home website saying much the same thing that the YouGov poll showed the night before, that Liz Truss holds a very commanding lead in this race.
OK. Tom, thank you. Very interesting indeed. But what does it mean for you? Let's talk to one of our viewers and listeners, Clive Taylor. Morning to you, Clive. Good to see you this morning. Look, hello. I know you're no longer a member of the Conservative Party, but you used to, so you don't get a vote in this. But if you did, where would your cross go?
My cross would go for Liz Truss. There's lots of reasons for it. One being that I'm very concerned about the involvement of both the candidates with the World Economic Forum, and I want to make sure that their priority will be to this country and not to the World Economic Forum. And also, I am concerned about the madness, in my opinion, that Boris Johnson has done to this country. For example, the massive economic damage, the lockdown, in my opinion, unnecessary mass vaccination, the furlough, the net zero, and the climate change hysteria. And I think that I want these candidates to change this.
Well, what was wrong with... Forgive me for jumping in, but what was wrong with furlough? Because obviously Rishi Sunak's using that as his big ticket, if you like, to say, well, look what I did.
Well, yes, but he is paying people for staying at home and doing nothing while the country is going into economic decline. That was a massive concern of mine. The other concern I've got about Sajid Javid is, why would a Prime Minister that's got more money than the Queen want a job of £160,000 a year? And my conclusion is that his in-laws are trying to get through contracts to this government for ID, digital ID and digital currency. And I believe that his ulterior motive is that and not the Premiership.
OK, well, Clive, Tyler, always good to get all views here on GB News. And I just want to pick up on that point from Tom Harwood. I mean, look, a lot of people would say the wealth of Rishi Sunak shouldn't be used as a rod to beat him with. In many ways, it's a very conservative story. Certainly, that's what he said. It's been built from scratch and employs tens of thousands of people here in this country.
Yes, a lot of the biggest rounds of applause that Rishi Sunak has achieved at these hustings, or indeed at some of these debates as well, has been when he's defended sort of his family's story and this conservative message that the politics of envy isn't something that the party should be going down. But I think perhaps there are some more attractive qualities to the Premiership of the United Kingdom than simply ones that are to do with money. Clearly, when people have a lot of money, there's sometimes an attraction to public service to achieve something else, because there's not much else that they can gain in terms of wealth.
A nice
so potentially that might explain there.
How lovely. Yeah, but the issue with that, and you're quite right, politics of envy is never healthy. But the problem is, it's when, especially when we're in this economic situation now, it's how much connection do people like that have to what real people are going through at the moment. They have no concept, do they, of not being able to to be able to heat or cook or buy the bill,
have any
pay the bills.
more ability to do that than Rishi Sunak just because she's not married to a billionaire? I mean, both of them live in relative comfort and have all the trappings of being in the cabinet.
And let's not beat around the bush. Anyone, as soon as they get to any senior level in politics, as soon as any individual gets close to being Prime Minister of this country, they are well removed from the ordinary life of an individual. If they're a senior cabinet minister, they're driven everywhere. If they are the Foreign Secretary, it's unlikely they'll nip to the shop for a pint of milk. When politicians are asked for the price of milk, they have to study this. They don't know it intuitively. And of course, if you're Prime Minister, so many have described being behind the gates of Downing Street can actually feel pretty suffocating. You can't go anywhere without the permission of your Secret Service. You cannot live a normal life at that level in politics. In fact, for many people, the longer they have been Prime Minister, the less in touch they have got. It's simply unrealistic for anyone to believe that someone in that position could live the exact same life as people outside that peculiar political bubble. So, to some extent, what really matters is who they have around them, as well as their own life experience.
How much is a pint of milk, Tom?
Oh.
A pint of milk, I think it's 59 pence.
There you go.
It's probably gone up because I normally buy the four. I normally buy these enormous.
Well, this is the trouble. I have to. I buy sort of the 2 litres.
Yeah.
So I don't.
The 2.1s are closer to £1. The 4.1s you can usually get for about £1.60.
Where do you shop?
I've got a local Sainsbury's near where I live. So
you can't catch him out. You can't catch him out. Try as we might.
I'm sure all of these numbers, because looking at the rate of inflation right now and the expectation this morning that inflation might go well beyond 10% even by the end of this year, potentially, even in the time that I've been talking, the price has gone up from 89 pence to £2.50. Who knows?
Well, you know what? We are going to be talking about all of that in a little while. But for now, Tom, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Clive as well. That line dropped out to Clive, unfortunately. But it was good to talk to him, brief as it was. Now, the Labour Party is accusing the Tories of creating a backlog Britain by focusing on infighting more than governing.
Well, let's speak to Preet Gill, MP, Shadow Secretary of State for International Development. What do you mean by that, Preet?
Seeing right before us is that the basic functions of government just doesn't seem to be working. I mean, the state that we find the country in is really down to Rishi and Liz. Of course, they are continuity candidates. I mean, only this week, the government, by their own admission, are saying that they're going to miss the NHS targets around waiting lists that they have set for themselves. And of course, we have 6.6 million people now waiting for planned care, highest number on record. And it isn't just hospital delays, it's GP waiting, times, it's dentist appointments, it's the lorry drivers that we've seen at Dover, as you've seen, it's the court backlog, 43% increase in the last 5 years. And this is a government that really hasn't got a grip on it. And I don't think I'm different to any other MP up and down the country. The amount of constituents that have contacted us about delays with passports. I mean, tens of thousands of people are having to wait up to 10 weeks for passports. The fact of the matter is, things are just not functioning and working. And all the while, we have two candidates that are trying to appeal to their membership and taking lumps out on each other. So the Conservatives have created backlog Britain because both Rishi and Liz don't actually have a plan as to how they're going to unclog the system, what it is that they're actually going to do. This is making life very difficult for the British public.
Forgive me, but it was the Labour Party and Keir Starmer who were saying the Prime Minister needs to go. This would have been even more chaotic if he'd gone. If he was making big policy decisions in number 10, despite the fact he is going at the end of the month, you'd be kicking off. So, they can't win, can they, as far as Labour's concerned?
But that's not true. The exit of a Prime Minister shouldn't mean that the rest of Whitehall is starting to crumble and melt down and actually things are not able to function. Good leadership means that you have policies and processes in place. So regardless of what happens and if there is a change, that will continue. And what we are not seeing is any of that work being done. Who is actually in charge? I think it's quite concerning what we're hearing from the NHS.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that point you're making, the Prime Minister is still in office. He is still running the country until this leadership debate is concluded. And in fairness to the candidates, we've been discussing on this programme in the last week or so plans to try and tackle the problems that have been identified within the civil service, within Whitehall, trying to cut down some of the fat, which is perhaps causing some of those backlogs that you describe.
Well, I mean, I don't think the Prime Minister is working. I mean, the report says that the Prime Minister has checked out. He's obviously been preparing for his wedding. He's been distracted. I mean, good God, what has he been doing around the lorry, the fact that lorry drivers are having to wait up to 15 hours? What is his plan to address the backlog in the hospital? The University of Hospital of Birmingham, in my constituency, has 160,000 people waiting for planned care. Ambulances are outside of the hospital on a daily basis, finding it very difficult to transfer patients in. These are serious concerns. People are dying. We have a Conservative government that, I'm sorry, isn't actually showing the leadership that the country needs. It's actually more consumed with what the leadership candidates are offering today, as opposed to the state that the country finds itself, and what it needed was proper leadership. And that's exactly what it can expect from the Labour Party. It will get the fresh start that Britain actually deserves. OK, Preet Gill, we've got to leave it there, but good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Do you agree with what Preet Gill has to say? Let us know, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And I say, price of milk. I tell you why I don't pay much attention to the price of milk.
Don't drink it.
No, because you can't get it much cheaper, can you? And you
Well, that's the thing,
You go to the
yeah,
supermarket. But I tell you what I do know the price of is bread.
Yeah?
Because there's real differences in the price
How
of
much
bread.
is a sourdough?
Well, I don't know if it's that, but it's expensive, that
Yeah,
sort of
no,
stuff,
it's
isn't
really
it?
expensive.
Whereas if you go for, I've said this before, if you go for the supermarket bread, you can get it for £1 less. Huge difference.
Money saving.
Might not be quite as nice, but once you've banged it in the toaster, who knows?
It's better to have fresh bread. Look, we're going to be talking about this really emotive issue, that Britain's forgotten war widows. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Some of you, indeed, war widows yourselves. Will be reflecting your views and talking about this issue after the break. So we've been discussing this morning, they've been stripped of their pensions if they remarry. We're now calling, or in fact they are now calling for them to be reinstated. The whole issue examined after this quick break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Morning to you. It is very nearly 8:27. There you go. Welcome to the programme, whether you're watching us on TV, online, listening to us on the radio. It is great to have you with us.
Yes, it is. Stay with us. At 8:45 this morning, we'll be speaking to former leadership candidate and Liz Truss now supporter, Suella Braverman, about her war on woke witch trials. It's on the front of the Daily Mail this morning. It's trending on Twitter. She's going to be on our show in 15 minutes.
I want to ask her about her name, but I probably won't.
Braverman.
No, Suella.
Oh.
Because she's called Sue Ellen.
Right.
As in Dallas.
So what do you want to ask her? Was she named
Why-
after?
No, why has she changed it to Suella?
Oh, right.
Suella's cool.
All the important issues of the day.
I think it's really cool. But I'm a child of the 80s, so there you go.
9:15, we're going to be talking to Princess Diana's former personal protection officer. He's got a new book out. He's going to be reflecting on the 25th anniversary of her death in Paris.
25 years.
Unbelievable.
Can't quite believe that. Anything you want to talk about, love to hear from you. GBviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Now, hundreds of British war widows are calling on whoever becomes the next Prime Minister to right a historic wrong and reinstate their war widow pension.
Now, until 2015, those whose husbands died in active service were stripped of their pensions if they remarried.
Now, although the law was changed 7 years ago, around 300 who'd married before were not included in the new scheme. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, spoke exclusively to some of the widows who say they've been forgotten by a government that simply doesn't care.
He lived for flying. You marry somebody in the Air Force, you marry the military, and everything that comes with it.
Jude Howcroft's husband Bill was killed in a flying accident behind the controls of his RAF Tornado in 1998. In the months before his death, Jude recalls one particular conversation where her husband insisted if the worst ever happened, she had to try her best to move on with her life.
Bill actually sat me down and said, right, we need to have a conversation. Things do happen, you've seen it. And I want you to promise me that if you fall in love again, you don't hold back and you live your life for me and the kids.
7 years after Bill's death, Jude finally found love again and remarried. Official government policy meant she automatically lost her £7,000 annual war widows compensation payment.
I have never stopped loving Bill. Ever. But the fact that I had to give up my pension, it was almost being judged that how dare I find love again. I clearly couldn't have loved my first husband. And it just makes me so angry.
In 2015, the government changed its policy, ensuring any war widow who remarried still received their war widow's pension. But hundreds who'd remarried before that date were not included. They are, they say, the forgotten widows.
It's wrong. It's immoral. It's discrimination. And the compensation, which is called the War Widow's Pension, is the only tangible link these individuals have to their late husband.
40 years after the death of her husband Ian aboard HMS Argonaut in the Falklands, and although Margaret Allen remarried, she is still profoundly affected by his loss. She met the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, in 2018, who promised to right a wrong, to ensure that war widows' pensions were restored. Margaret's now calling on the woman who may well be our next Prime Minister to make good on that promise.
I would ask her to stand by that statement and resolve this now. It's almost 7 years we have been campaigning to get this corrected. All we're asking for is parity with our peers. We've struggled, we've been traumatised and stressed for 7 years. Enough is enough.
We are the forgotten few. Our husbands paid the price, but that injustice remains. We're not asking for anything that isn't rightfully ours.
Well, Mark White is here in the studio. Morning, Mark. I mean, it's fascinating to look at that, and you would tend to watch it and say, well, obviously this needs to be addressed. Not everyone agrees.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of inequalities in the pension system, and some people saying that, well, it's right that if they remarry, they should have their pension stripped from them. But the fact is, the armed forces occupy a special place in the nation because they are asked to go out to fight, to sometimes die for their country. And what the war widows tell me is that this pension, it's not really a pension, it's only £7,000 a year. It's actually a compensation payment, an acknowledgement that their lives have been ripped apart as well.
Yeah.
It's not just their loved one that's given their lives to their country, they have in that sense as well. And what they say is they feel that they're being judged, that should they have the audacity to actually move on with their life, to try and find love again and a bit of happiness, and then actually remarry, they're being stripped of that acknowledgement, that compensation that, yes, you did suffer this terrible loss in the service of your country.
We spoke to Mary, didn't we, a little bit earlier on, who's features in your report that we just played, and she talked about how David Cameron had called it a grotesque injustice all those years ago when he was Prime Minister, and yet nothing has changed. Is she right? Did the government just simply not care? Is there a callousness
Well,
here?
I think the government do care to an extent. Both the politicians and armed forces chiefs and others acknowledge this now. That battle's been won. From 2015, the law was changed so that no one else who is married to service personnel will have their war pensions payments taken away from them if they ever remarry. But the difficulty is, in doing that, all these people who remarried before 2015, and there was 300 of them, have missed out and have never got that compensation.
Which seems
restored.
absolutely unfair.
It is, yeah. And
I mean, that's very hard to
what
justify.
as well? It was 300 in 2015. It's now down to 220. They're dying off by a dozen or so every year.
Is part of the issue, because on the surface of it, you look at it and say, well, why just not restore it to these people? Is part of the problem that they would have to back pay it? Is that the issue? They're looking at them, simply looking at the figures?
It's not really much of a monetary issue because, as the war widows point out to me, they are dying. They're dying each year. The money that they have to pay out is decreasing all of the time.
So what's preventing them then? What is it just
bureaucracy?
Simply bureaucracy, and that's just the worst defence, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are told that the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence have this issue. It's a live issue at the moment. They're looking at trying to rectify it, but whether it will be rectified to an extent where these war widows feel that actually now that wrong has been, readdressed, and they are now fully acknowledged as having suffered this grievous loss as well. Of course,
I was just going to say, Mark, I mean, the issue is, and as Steve pointed out earlier on when he emailed in and said he didn't really agree with it, but as you say, the whole point of someone getting remarried is because their life has been absolutely turned around from what they had planned because of service to the country.
That's it. And as I say, they say, it's more of a compensation, an acknowledgement by the state that, it wasn't just your loved one. You also, had your life completely turned around and ripped apart in service to your nation. And they're calling on Liz Truss, who, according to the polls, may very well be our next Prime Minister, who apparently made this promise in 2018 to right this wrong, to now make good on that promise.
This is a win-win for her then, isn't it? I mean, because
you think so, but her campaign haven't got back to us. We reached out to them and they've not replied. Now, this is a woman that says she always keeps her promise, she gets things done. So let's see what she says.
Yeah, because if it's not going to be a winner for the people involved here, it would be a vote winner for her. Come a general election, it would be a vote winner for her.
There is no doubt about that. I think, despite what Steve and one or two others have said, I think the vast majority of people across the country can see that, this just was blatantly unfair.
Is there a sense, do you think, that we are getting, partly because of Ukraine and heightened tensions and all the rest of it, it makes us focus on the armed forces a bit more. Do you think we are paying them more attention? We're looking at the situation our armed forces are in more closely.
I think you make a very valid point there. There is so much turmoil in the world at the moment. With Ukraine, we've just seen it with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House in the United States, visit to Taiwan, and the reaction now from China. We don't know how that's going to play out in the days ahead. People realise the value that there is in our armed forces out there potentially laying their life on the line to protect this country. So, yeah, they are focused on that.
Okay. Mark, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's interesting because when we talk about, it's always, there can't be anyone in the country who doesn't think it's very, very sad when someone in their armed forces loses their lives. When you have to live with it, when you are someone who has been through that loss.
Yeah, you never get over that.
That's a totally different ball game. And I know from my family that where that's happened, and it is beyond devastating.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. After that, we'll go through your papers one last time, Baroness Claire Fox and David Wooding. And then after that, we'll be talking to Suella Braverman. Stay with us.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Time to go through the papers once again this morning. Joining us, political editor of The Sun on Sunday, Mr. David Wooding, and director for the Academy of Ideas, Baroness Claire Fox. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Let's talk football for girls in the eye, David.
Yes, well, the victorious England team have written to the government saying that they want, or they've in fact written to the two next wannabe prime ministers, saying that the curriculum, school curriculum, should be changed to allow sport for girls to include football. Now, I'm a little bit with them on this because, you know, girls do like playing football. The problem will be you need 22 girls playing football to get a couple of teams going, and it's very difficult for them to change the curriculum overnight to include football. But I think this is the big
teams.
I think that maybe five-a-side at this beginning of the start. There's an interesting thing I read earlier in the week. A local paper back in 1988 had a front page splash about Ellen White, one of the England stars, had been banned from playing in the local school team, and this had made a big story locally. And that woman went on 28 years later to have 113 England caps. Scoring loads of goals and winning the European Championship with England. So it can be done. But it's an interesting issue, and it'd be interesting to see. I think it's the start of more and more girls getting interested in football.
Yeah, sure.
For sure.
Claire, let's talk about the big endorsement for Truss, the latest one, Sajid Javid. He came out last night, despite being a former ally of Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, I thought it was worth having a look at this, only because
There's so little to say on the leadership elections at the moment because it's dull as dishwater, to be truthful. But I thought this was interesting because you ended up with a situation where, talking about stabbing people in the back and creating an atmosphere where you never trust a politician again.
He's getting a reputation, isn't he?
Sajid Javid was one of the people who resigned, brought down Boris Johnson with Rishi Sunak, and then Rishi Sunak's getting quite a lot of kickback as being one of the kind of stabbers on, you know, that whole issue, stabbing in the back type thing. And Sajid Javid has decided he'll go with what looks to be the winning number. Now this, rather than thinking, oh, he's really thought this through, he's got a principled position here, immediately you think, oh my God, these people, solidarity doesn't exist. There's no such thing as being an ally. There's no principles involved in this at
Do you
all.
think, and we don't know, and they denied it, but do you think there was some sort of pact between him and Rishi?
Well, regardless of whether there was or not, they both did it on the same day, so you'd think that there'd be some informal sense of solidarity that they were both acting.
I don't think there was, you know.
Yeah, you don't think
there was? No, because
No.
what I noticed was when the two letters were published in the newspapers, there was a date on Sajid's letter, but there wasn't on Rishi's. And we now learn that Rishi was planning it back in. He set up the domain. Or
Doesn't mean they weren't in cahoots.
No,
just
but
because he'd written it in advance. He was just waiting for the moment, wasn't he?
I think perhaps when Sajid Javid resigned, Rishi Sunak thought, "Oh,
now's the
I better
moment.
get in on the act," and that because it was very soon afterwards.
Yeah, that might well be what it is.
Yeah, but
I suppose the thing is just to say that you don't feel at the moment. There's quite a number of people sort of swapping sides, largely moving over to Liz Truss. I'm simply saying it's a rather unsavoury situation to be in, because this is a very serious matter for the country. It's entirely appropriate for the Conservative Party to decide on their leader, and we understand that, but it will mean the Prime Minister. And we're not seeing people at their best. That's the point I'm making. There's already some disappointment at the limited options. It is true that Liz Truss is surprising people and doing well. I'm simply suggesting that my fear is that when it comes to a general election, people are rather disillusioned with politics per se.
Yeah.
And that there will be a lower turnout. And I just think this isn't encouraging people to believe that politicians really believe things and stick with their principles.
No, that's a fair point. David, are you one of life's winners?
Well, I was just thinking, will Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss be reading this? Because there's been a survey by a gaming company to find out what makes you happy and contented and one of life's winners, as it says. And the number one issue, understandably, is that you're in good health. After that, it's that you have a job which you love, and then after that, it's that you have a bit of spare cash in the bank. I think Rishi Sunak has, so he'll be okay.
No mention of love or family or...
Well, family's there.
Any of those things.
But it's quite interesting, you know. I mean, Stephen, this is bad news for you.
Oh, is it?
Number 18, people always laugh at your jokes. Your greatest attribute isn't doing you very good here.
No.
And then, you know, your partner is hot, is number 13.
Oh, you're all right there.
I'm all right there. 20, you have a six-pack. Oh, well,
Yeah,
we,
well, I mean,
we can dream.
Number 4, you can eat what you want without putting on
That's
weight.
that's the one I noticed and thought I'm one of life's losers. I mean, if you go through this, I think, God, this hardly applies to me.
Oh, dear.
You are naturally stylish.
You have good
Yeah.
skin.
I mean, who says that anyway? I am naturally stylish.
I know.
Your children are well behaved.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
me
that's
now.
like, yeah. in your dreams.
Oh,
It's good fun, though, isn't it?
It is depressing, because if you've got a job that you love, which most people don't, and you've got a bit of spare cash in the bank, which most people don't, then, you know, there you go. Don't take it to heart. Don't take it to heart.
It could be a trigger warning,
Oh.
which segues us perfectly into this
Very
paragraph.
good. I like that. Well, on the other hand, you might be wandering around thinking, having a conversation about Anglo-Saxon poetry in the morning on the breakfast show, what's that all about? But it's because University in Aberdeen have basically issued trigger warnings to Beowulf, right, which is a gory... It's a very difficult poem to read. I did read it at university. I can't say that I liked it. But what I didn't have was trigger warnings that said things like, text studies on this course contain representations of violence, coercion, animal cruelty, animal death, incest, suicide, explicit sexual content, and ableism. And they literally warn people that there's issues of eating disorders in Beowulf. I mean, so it flattens history out. There's no sense that this is a particular historical period. There's no appreciation of the literary qualities of a very important piece of literature. It treats students as though they are snowflakes. That phrase is quite insulting. I think students can cope with this stuff, but it's the authorities in universities that now are taking decisions that mean that students themselves become frightened of the course material they're studying.
Yeah, it's utterly crackers. Yeah. If I can say that without getting into trouble. I don't think I can. David Wooding, Claire Fox, good to see you both this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
And look, all of this discussion, I suppose, really segues very nicely into this next interview. We're speaking to the Attorney General, Suella Braverman. She's been hitting out at diversity training, declaring war on so-called woke witch trials.
Yeah, she's branded the diversity industry a new religion. So will the candidate she's backing for leader, Liz Truss, do something about it? Let's talk to her now. It's very good to see you this morning. Why are we getting too woke then, do you think? Why do we think that some of this training which we are forced to go through at times is a bad thing? Isn't it making us more tolerant?
I have nothing against tolerant and inclusive and meritocratic workplaces, don't get me wrong, but what I do have a problem with is the indoctrination of very fair-minded, professional and reasonable people with a left-wing and politicised ideology which engenders a particular view of race and gender. And what I found happening in my department is that thousands of hours were being spent on training government lawyers on really questionable issues. It was all premised on a misassumption, in my view, that ethnic minorities, myself as an Asian woman, must necessarily be a victim of white privilege, must necessarily be a victim of white fragility. I mean, these ideas are anathema to meritocracy, to British values, to creating a cohesive society. And I was really disappointed that a lot of time and resource is being spent on this within my department, within the civil service, but also within the corporate and private sector as well.
And why was it being spent on in your department when you've had a Conservative Parliament, Conservative government now for over a decade, and indeed both candidates who are standing have been in that cabinet? Why has it not been dealt with before?
I think there's been a takeover of the human resources sector by politicised lobby groups which have pushed and propagated a particular view of gender and race and equalities. And that's inculcated training. And under the guise of diversity, equality, inclusion, professionals are being taught this really questionable material. And I don't think that that is right. It's not necessarily been a decision made. These decisions have not been made by ministers. They've been made by senior civil servants and people who have responsibility for more operational deployment within the civil service. So I really urge executives in the private sector, I urge fellow ministers to look more closely at what taxpayers' money is being spent on and to remove it when they get a chance. That's what I've instructed in civil servants to do. I think effectively it's a waste of money, and actually that vital civil service resource should be used in a much more meaningful way. For example, actually delivering public services for the British people.
Why do you call it, as you did in your first response, a left-wing issue? This isn't actually sort of political in that sense, is it? This seems to span left and right.
No, I think it does come from the left, definitely, because some of these ideas like white privilege and is based on a critical race theory that's espoused generally by the left, and it's a feature of a particular politicised view of race and gender. Intersectionality is another term as well, espoused generally by the left. So I think it's a particular political ideology. I think it's questionable. I don't agree with it. I know many people in Britain don't agree with it. I know many of my constituents in Fareham don't agree with it. It's not what British values are about. It's not a positive vision of our country. It's not meritocratic. It's actually patronising. It's disempowering and it's divisive.
Yeah, and Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak's come out during his leadership campaign and said he also wants to tackle this issue. Is it something that Liz Truss wants to address? And will she go so far as to look into the use of some of this critical race theory that you're talking about in our schools, even our primary schools?
Well, Liz Truss has been the Equalities Minister for several years now, and she gave a very pertinent speech on this very issue in 2020, and it set out exactly the concerns that I've raised recently. So she has, long before it's fashionable, taken quite a strong line on supporting freedom of speech, supporting freedom of thought, being against the cancel culture that we're seeing pervade some of our schools and particularly our universities, and ensuring that we actually create a society which is based on mutual respect, meritocracy, judging people by their ability to do the job rather than any personal characteristic. And I know that Liz, for me, has been very forthright and commonsensical when it comes to identity politics, and that's why I'm supporting her.
Whilst you're talking in your capacity as Attorney General, I want to ask you about the very emotive issue of Archie Battersby. We've seen time and again now the family trying every legal avenue. We've seen the government step in and call for a review at one point as well. It seems as though every legal possibility has now been exhausted by the family. What are your views on cases like this when it really does feel as though the medics and lawyers are being pitted against what clearly is a family very publicly going through the most terrible sort of anguish?
Well, my thoughts, my sympathies and my prayers go to the family of Archie Battersby. I cannot begin to imagine what they must be all going through in this very tragic situation. And the parents of Archie have tried everything they possibly can to prolong the medical care for Archie. They've exhausted all of the legal avenues in the UK, going right up to the Supreme Court, and a few days ago the Supreme Court refused their application for permission to appeal. And they've also gone to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and that court also refused their application to intervene. So it does look like they have exhausted all legal avenues, and I'm just incredibly very, very sorry. It is a tragic situation. This is a very, very complex matter. Of course the parents have the best interests of Archie at the forefront of their mind. Weighed against that are clinical considerations and medical opinions, and I know that English judges will have considered this very sensitively, very thoroughly, and have reached the right decision.
Look, we're very nearly out of time. Can I ask you about something else which has really got our viewers and listeners emailing in today, which we've been covering, about war widows' pensions, something which 300 people actually were left out of, they've been left behind in this, who still aren't getting the pensions from their former husbands because they remarried. That was addressed for a lot of people in 2015, but there's 300 who've been left behind. Liz Truss said she would sort it out back in 2018. It's not been done yet. Is it something you would talk to her about to resolve this issue and get parity for these people?
Well, forgive me, I don't know too much about the details, so I'm not going to commit any leadership candidate to any policy pledge, but without them thinking about it in detail. But if Liz has said that she's committed to sorting it out, then I absolutely 100% trust her. It sounds like a very, very disagreeable situation and very unsatisfactory if there's a cohort of women who have been left hanging, so to speak, and without proper compensation from the pension settlement that they've been promised. I think if there has been an agreement, then that must be honoured. But in any other regard, we must look at it more closely and ensure that there's equity and a fair resolution for these war widows.
Suella Braverman. We're both saying thank you. It's been very good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
you.
Well, don't go anywhere. Coming up, we'll be talking to a Rishi Sunak supporter. That's Mel Stride. First, though, here's your weather.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south. Dry today, and in fact the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news though if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast. Generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week. But again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Archie Battersby's family reached the deadline to launch a new legal bid, or life support will be turned off.
Good morning. It's just after 9 o'clock. It's Thursday, the 4th of August. You're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Stephen.
This is what's leading the news for you today. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby said the legal battle to maintain her son's life support is at an end, after the European Court said it would not interfere with the UK court's ruling.
Life support is now expected to be withdrawn at 11 o'clock this morning. That's unless we hear in the next few moments about any application from Archie's family to move him to a hospice.
The former Health Secretary, Javid, has endorsed Liz Truss for the Conservative leadership in another blow to Rishi Sunak. The two candidates will go head-to-head in another leadership debate last night. Actually, they're not going head-to-head, are they? They're doing two separate sort of interviews, as it were, but there you go.
Meanwhile, Bank of England is delivering its latest interest rate decision today at midday, as the UK could potentially be facing recession. Rates are widely expected to be going up for the sixth time in a row, raising costs for millions of borrowers.
I'd love to hear from you this morning. Anything you want to talk about, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Want to read a few?
Tweet us. I just want to go Malcolm in Carlisle. Carlisle's so lovely.
I love Carlisle.
Oh, the cathedral and everything, absolutely gorgeous. We have had one dry day in the last week, says Malcolm. Looks like Westminster only worries about levelling up when the South East runs out of water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CJ, cheerful message from him or her, I don't know, sorry if it's a man or a woman. With water shortages here again in the south, local government and councils still continue their destruction of our countryside and rivers and are replacing it with tens of thousands of unwanted houses and roads. Of course, there is a shortage of housing.
Shortage of houses, yeah. Robin in Cardiff, plus Maria, Peter and Daniel all say we need to build up plants to use seawater more. That desalination, it's very effective. I don't know if it's expensive or not. There might be a cost issue, I don't know.
If we didn't mothball the ones that we have already got. That would be a good one. That's front of the Telegraph today. Anyway, keep those thoughts coming in. Half an hour more to do that. OK, our top story this morning. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby says the legal battle to postpone the withdrawal of life support is now at the end.
Well, the 12-year-old's life support is going to be turned off this morning unless the family have submitted an application to the High Court to have him moved to a hospice. That had to happen by 9 o'clock. So we'll find out in a moment if we know whether that has happened or not.
But as we were discussing with the Attorney-General just before the break, this has been a long, protracted legal argument on Archie's family's side. Let's just remind you of the key dates in all of this. On the 7th of April is when the tragedy all really began. He was found at home in Essex, unresponsive, and was taken to hospital in Southend.
On June 13th, the High Court concluded that Archie was dead based on MRI results, brain dead that is. They decided then that life support could end.
Well, between the 20th of June and the 29th of June, after Archie's parents asked the Court of Appeal to reconsider the case, it ruled that a new hearing should take place to determine Archie's best interests.
On the 28th of July, the Supreme Court says it wouldn't intervene in the case, supporting the Court of Appeal ruling.
Well, a day later, on the 29th of July, the family make another application, this time to the United Nations.
And then yesterday, Archie's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights. They refused the application to postpone the withdrawal of life support.
Well, let's speak to Ellie Costello, who is at the London hospital for us this morning. Good morning to you, Ellie. Look, the anguish in all of this, for any parent watching or listening to this, they will understand why Archie's family have done everything that they could possibly do. And yet it does feel as though, certainly in legal terms, as though they are at the end of the road. But what is the latest in all of this?
Yes, well, it does very sadly seem like all legal avenues have been exhausted, but the family certainly feel as though they have to do everything they can, which is perhaps one of the reasons why this has gone on for so long. It's gone up as far as the Supreme Court in the UK. All of the judges said pretty much the same thing, that they considered Archie Battersby to be brainstem dead, and they don't consider that he has any chance of recovery. Yesterday, the European Court of Human Rights, they refused to intervene in the withdrawal of Archie Battersby's care. They say they will not intervene in UK court decisions. Now, the plan was, as a result of that hearing from the European Court of Human Rights yesterday, for Archie Battersby's life support machine to be switched off at 11 o'clock this morning. That's in under 2 hours' time. That was unless his parents submitted a new legal bid, and that new legal bid is about where Archie should die. They want to move him to a hospital, to a hospice. The hospital want him to remain in their care. So that 9 o'clock deadline has just passed. We don't yet have any confirmation on whether they managed to get that legal bid in on time. I spoke to the lawyers this morning. They had been working hard throughout the night. It really was going to come down to the wire. I have just spoken to Christian Concern. They are the group that have been supporting the Battersby family throughout this. They were very confident that that deadline was met. They said that the family lawyers have met every single deadline that they've had to so far, so they don't see any reason why it wouldn't have been met. But we don't yet know if it was met, and if it was, what the details of that legal bid are. But of course, I'll bring that to you as soon as we have it. But the hospital, it's important to note, will not change any of Archie's care whilst there are any legal proceedings going on. So if that legal bid was lodged on time at 9 o'clock, that life support machine will not be switched off at 11 o'clock this morning. But it does mean if it got in on time at 9 o'clock, it's another agonising wait for Archie Battersby's parents to decide what happens next in terms of Archie's care. They don't yet know whether he'll have to stay at the hospital for his last few hours or days, or whether he can be moved to hospice care.
What a horrific situation. OK, Ellie, for now, thank you. I know you will keep us up to date. Now, to the world of politics for you once again. Rishi Sunak has suffered another setback in his battle to become Prime Minister after Sajid Javid, his old boss, actually, chose to back his rival, Liz Truss.
Well, both candidates were grilled by Tory members at a hustings in Cardiff last night. Liz Truss spoke about how she planned to try and win over voters.
I think as somebody who is from not a Conservative background, who, I've got friends in other parties, my family, lots of them don't support the Conservatives. But I know how to convince people and how to bring people on board. So I think being a convert is actually an asset. Because what do we have to do at the election? We have to convert people. We can't just talk to ourselves. We actually have to go there and win in the country.
Well, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak emphasised his plans for tackling immigration.
We need to move away from the ECHR definition of asylum. Right, it is, yes, you're right, we should clap that because it is important. Right, it is far too broad and allows lefty lawyers to exploit it and frustrate our efforts. So I think we should move to the Refugee Convention, which is another international legal standard, but it is narrower and tighter and will give us a greater ability to say to people, you can't stay. We have this slightly absurd situation that we'll go and talk to a country about signing a trade deal with them and giving them access to our market. We'll even go further and say, actually, here's some aid from our aid budget to help you. And whilst we're doing all of that, we slightly neglect to say, oh, hang on, can you take back your failed asylum seekers?
Well, look, let's speak to one of Rishi Sunak's supporters. That's the MP for Central Devon, Mel Stride. Good morning to you. Look, it's got to really hurt, hasn't it, to be losing the support of Sajid Javid. Not only did they work together in the Treasury and they quit famously a few weeks ago together, bringing down Boris Johnson, but also they're old friends, going to the cinema to watch Star Wars together.
Well, I can't tell you exactly why Sajid has chosen to do what he's done, but what I can tell you is that Rishi has huge support amongst members of Parliament. And in fact, if you go back to the first phase of this contest, of course, in the 5 rounds, he led in every single round amongst the MPs. And the reason for that is that what members of Parliament know is that he is best placed to win the next general election, particularly amongst those 2019 Labour voters that voted Conservative for the first time, have since drifted away. He is best placed to bring them back. And that's what the polls are showing.
Well, look, you say you can't tell us why Sajid Javid decided to endorse Liz Truss. I can tell you why. He said that we're in danger of sleepwalking into a high-tax, low-growth economy and that Liz Truss was the only candidate challenging the status quo.
Well, I find that curious because Sajid, who I know fairly well, he's typically has a Thatcherite approach to economics. I think as a young man, he had Lady Thatcher's portrait up or poster up in his bedroom even. And I would have thought on that basis, when you look at the two economic offerings of these two candidates, I would have expected to have been leaning more towards Rishi, because what Rishi is saying is that inflation is the #1 enemy. We've got to tame it. It's ruinous to living standards. And the worst thing that we can do now is £60 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts that will stoke inflation. It will lead to higher interest rates, which will have to be borne by millions of people up and down the country. An average mortgage, for example, for a 1% increase in interest rates would have to go up by £585 per month. So the approach that we need to have is getting on top of inflation, getting growth going, and then coming to measured and responsible tax cuts, which is exactly what Nigel Lawson and Margaret Thatcher did in the early 1980s. And in fact, Lord Lawson has a very good article in the Daily Telegraph today setting that exactly out, and also making the point that what Chancellor Barber did in the early 70s, by contrast, when there was high inflation, was to tax cuts. It led to an overheated economy, and we then lost the next general election. So if we're going to win the election, we've got to be responsible fiscally about the way we approach these issues.
The average mortgage payment in the UK, according to Boone Brokers, is £723 a month. And you say if it went up by 1%, that would increase to £1,200. That's not true.
Sorry, it would be £1,400. The average mortgage is £140,000, so 1% would be £1,400 per year. Sorry, I think the figure that I was looking at there was what would happen if Patrick Minford, who is Liz Truss's economic guru's predictions came to pass, which would be that interest rates could rise by as much as 5%. So whichever way you look at it, for every increase in interest rates, it will be very painful for those that have mortgages. And of course, it will also add to the cost of servicing the national debt. Every 1% increase in interest rates means the national debt servicing costs go up by £20 billion. And that's £20 billion, which is not therefore available for either paying down the debt or funding our vital national public services. So we've got to really get serious about this. We've got to tame inflation. We can't fuel it with unfunded tax cuts.
You started this interview by saying, well, look, the polls show that Rishi Sunak is, the most popular amongst MPs, most popular to win the general election. That's beside the point, isn't it? I mean, it's utterly beside the point. You're appealing to Conservative Party members, which on the latest Conservative home poll, Liz Truss was 34 or 36 points ahead? I mean, why doesn't Rishi just throw in the towel now? He's not going to win.
OK. Well, I think the first point is that Conservative Party members do care about whether we win the next general election, and therefore they will be interested in polls that suggest that Rishi Sunak is best placed to do that. But the second thing is, let's just talk about these polls that appear to be showing a very large lead for Liz Truss. The Conservative Party membership is extraordinarily difficult to poll. How do pollsters know who they are, who's a member? How do they know what the relative weightings are of that membership across different constituencies and different parts of the country? And all I can tell you is that based on the evidence that we're getting through our supportive MPs, talking to members, etc., this is a far tighter race than those polls appear to be suggesting. And I would go as far as to say that whoever wins this contest, I have a feeling that one of the big stories that will come out of it is just how inaccurate those polls actually were. This is a much tighter race than many imagine. Well, it feels a bit like 2016. People had polls saying one thing then at that time, and we ended up with a very different result.
Well, look, be that as it may, and look, we'll give you, let's assume you're right. Let's assume that it's very, very hard to poll members, and we have no idea where this is. You can't deny the narrative around all of this, whether or not it's reflected in the polls or not. Every single newspaper seems to be saying it's an absolute home run for Liz Truss. He's got to try and turn things around, hasn't he? And time is crucial. Those ballots expected to come through the letterbox any minute now.
Well, use the expression turn it around. I would say narrowing whatever gap there may be, and I think he's doing that very quickly. And I think the principal reasons why he's doing that, you saw it in the hustings last night, which many commentators thought he came out best with. I was at the Exeter hustings the other day, and he certainly, in my opinion at least, won that one. And the reason he is that people are beginning to focus more and more on the consequences of unfunded tax cuts, billions of pounds worth, the effect on inflation, the fact that we're just putting more and more debt on the country's credit card, passing it on to our children and grandchildren and so on. And they're really asking serious questions about how credible that economic policy is, because if it is the present danger that I believe it is, and many economists believe that, then we are going to lose the next general election. And I think the membership is beginning to look closely at that. That's the sense, that's the shift that I'm sensing, is who's got a credible plan.
Forgive me, Mel Stride, we're almost out of time, but we are out of time, really. But in all of this, I tell you what doesn't play well, and from what we're hearing from people getting in touch with us, is that Rishi Sunak does not seem to be across the fact that people need help now. I mean, this is absolutely desperate for people. And when he says, "Well, we'll look at what's happening with the price cap in October. We'll look what's happening with tax in a couple of years' time, or whatever it may be," that it's not enough. What he's not offering is something to help immediately, which is what people are not just demanding but needing.
Rishi Sunak cares hugely about how people that are struggling are getting on in our country. You saw it there with the furlough scheme that saved millions of jobs, a huge intervention. The IMF described it as the best in the world. You've also seen it more recently in coming forward with proposals or measures that are being rolled out now for up to £1,200 support for the most vulnerable with their energy bills. And of course, he's always said that, as with all these things, that it will be kept under review. So it's quite possible that either candidate will look at further support in that way. But what he's also doing is he's being absolutely honest. He is not standing up and saying, "I can give you this, that and the other, and we don't have to worry about paying it. We don't have to worry about sound money. We don't have to worry about inflation. We can cut taxes, tens of billions of pounds worth of tax cuts, and just move on and it'll all be okay." He's being honest. He's not going down that route. And that's one of the reasons I'm backing him.
OK, Mel Stride, we have to leave it there. Good to get your thoughts this morning. Thanks for making the time to do that.
Coming up, we're going to talk to Princess Diana's former bodyguard as we approach the 25th anniversary of her death.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
We've got some breaking news to bring you in the case of Archie Battersby. Let's go straight back to the Royal London Hospital this morning. Our reporter Ellie Costello there for us. Ellie, we've been waiting to hear whether or not his family would get that application in before 9 o'clock to have him moved to a hospice, whether the High Court would consider it. What can you tell us?
Well, hi, yes, breaking news here in the case of Archie Battersby. His parents have managed to submit a new legal bid. This is about where Archie should die. They submitted a bid. They want to move him to a hospice. There was a deadline of 9 o'clock this morning. It came right down to the wire, but I have just been told that that deadline was met and that application was made. No detail yet on what was said in that bid. We'll have that in the next few moments, I'm sure, and I'll bring that to you, of course, as soon as we have it. But we know that this is a big point of tension between the hospital and the parents. The parents of Archie Battersby do want him moved to a hospice. They want him away from the chaos and the noise of the hospital. The hospitals say that's not in the best interests of Archie. They say moving him will cause him to deteriorate quicker. So we know that the High Court will receive that application. We don't yet know whether they will hear it, and we will have another agonising wait ahead of us today where the parents will have to wait to see whether their son will spend his last few hours in the hospital behind us or whether he'll be moved to hospice care.
OK, Ellie, thanks very much indeed. And Ellie's going to keep us fully up to date with any more developments, of course. Now, let's just turn our attention to someone you'll be very familiar with, I should imagine, Ken Worth, who we used to hear a lot from. He was Princess Diana's former bodyguard. He's released a book, actually, on what is, as we approach towards the end of this month, 25 years since Diana died at the age of, she was just 36. Yeah, absolutely terrifying. Ken joins us now. It's good to see you, Ken. Why did you want to do this book? Why did you want to remember Diana this way?
Well, what's interesting is that in collaboration with Ros Coward, a well-known journalist, and Ros actually in 2002 was responsible for writing the Diana the portrait as part of Diana's foundation. And since that time, we've met and we're good friends. So we decided that here we are 25 years on. It's not as though actually Diana had been forgotten. We hear and see more of Diana now, particularly, when her two sons, William and Harry, sort of step onto the stage. So we thought that it was time to reflect on those 25 years and the life and the changes that Diana made, not necessarily deliberately, to the monarchy, how it's seen and received by the public. And I, like many, are surprised that here we are 25 years on, and this woman is still part of our life in so many different ways. So I think, what we've written, Ros and I, is a reflection of Diana's life from the beginning to the end. And it takes in all her charitable work, her relationships, her troubles, her failing marriage, and so forth. And so that was the book. So the title is very apt. It is Remembering a Princess.
And I'm just looking through some of the photographs, which I always enjoy doing with these sorts of books, and just, reminding myself, just so many iconic images. I'm looking at the one of her sat in front of the Taj Mahal, which just is imprinted in so many people's minds, and her also wearing that flak jacket from the Halo Trust when she was out doing all her amazing campaigning for Minds. And, 25 years on, and yet we can all remember those iconic images.
Well, we can. The Taj Mahal one was I was there on that occasion. And this was probably the last of the joint royal engagements that she did with the Prince of Wales, her husband. And it was ordinarily, this was a huge photo opportunity for the world, effectively. Anyone visiting India was always taken to the Taj Mahal. But in this particular case, the Prince of Wales clearly would have been unhappy sitting with his wife in this temple of love, given the circumstances and the state of their own marriage. But Diana was left with no choice but to do just that. And I remember it actually because, Diana sat on that bench in front of, the following paparazzi media. And it was actually Simon McCoy of Sky News at the time, as a young journalist, shouted to Diana, what does it feel like? Well, of course, no one was scripted on this. There was no press officer to advise her. And she turned to me and out of the corner of her mouth said, what on earth do I say to that? Well, of course, I didn't have any sort of prepared answer either, but I just said, well, just say that it was, it's a very healing experience, which she did. And then one of the jocular snappers from the front of the Rat Pack shouted up and said, what do you mean by that? And Diana, as quick as anything, just said very loudly, work it out for yourself. And from that point on, we just carried on the tour of the Taj Mahal.
Ken. It's going to be an interesting read, that's for sure. It's really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it. That's it from us for today. I'm back tomorrow morning with Ellie at 6 o'clock.
And I'll be back on Monday morning. But in the meantime, Tom Harwood will take you through the next half hour with the briefing.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's not good news if you're after rainfall across the south, dry today, and in fact the outlook is for very little rainfall. It is good news though if you've not been enjoying the heat and humidity. A much fresher feel out there today. High pressure is toppling back in. There will be showers across particularly the north and the west today, and they'll come and go with some sunny spells in between. A wet start across parts of eastern Scotland. Had some heavy rain yesterday evening across Northern Ireland. That has cleared away, but there'll be some showers here. A few for northwest England and North Wales, but as I said, across much of the south, it's dry and bright with spells of sunshine. Temperature-wise, well, it's already cooler out there compared to recent mornings, but we'll still see temperatures maybe getting up to 24, 25 across the southeast. But it's not as humid, a fresher feel, and for most places we're in the high teens or low 20s. A bit below average across northern Scotland, where there will be plenty of showers that keep going into the evening. More showers coming in this evening too across parts of Northern Ireland with a fresh breeze here. Elsewhere, it'll generally be a dry night again, and with clear skies, a pretty comfortable night as well, certainly compared to earlier in the week, with temperatures in many rural spots dipping down to single figures. And again, we won't have that humidity, so a pretty comfortable night. A fine start to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast, generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week, but again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.